I've always been drawn to caves. There's something about the silence, the darkness, and the way that the walls of rock close in around you that makes everything else in life just sort of disappear. I live near some foothills, and over the years I've mapped dozens of small caverns in the area, most barely worth exploring, but there is one system that's been on my mind for a long time. An unmarked cave, deep in the forest, accessed through a narrow fissure, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. So I decided to go alone one Saturday morning, packing my headlamp, ropes, climbing gear, and enough water to last the day. The entrance is hidden beneath a tangle of roots and fallen trees, which means that you could pass by it 100 times without ever noticing it. By the time that I arrived, the sun was high, filtering through the trees and golden shafts, but I knew that down below it would be extremely dark. The first few 100 feet of the cave were straightforward enough. I followed the main tunnel, careful not to disturb loose stones, my footsteps echoing softly in the confined space. I love the solitude, the way the air smelled damp and earthy. My flashlight cut through the darkness in a narrow beam, illuminating walls slick with moisture and dotted with mineral formations. It was when I reached a large chamber that things started to feel, well, a bit different than normal. The air grew suddenly colder, and there was this other scent that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I paused to rest a little bit, taking a sip of water and listening. At first, it was only the sound of dripping water, distant and irregular. But then, there was this, what I can only describe as a faint murmur, like voices just out of reach. Upon hearing them, I froze, straining to listen. The words were indistinct, muffled as if traveling through layers of rock, but there was definitely a pattern to them, like somebody was speaking to me, quietly, in a language that I couldn't understand. I shook my head, telling myself that it must just be an echo, or maybe a trick of the acoustics or something. I had been alone in caves before, and sometimes your mind does play games with you in the darkness like that. I moved on, deeper into the chamber, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. But the murmuring grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from every direction at once, whispering around the edges of my hearing. I couldn't locate a source. Then I noticed shadows. My headlamp caught the flicking across the walls, thin, elongated shapes that seemed to move against the natural contours of the rock. I instantly stopped, spinning slowly, trying to see if they were just tricks of the light or not. Each time I paused, the whispers stopped too, leaving only the sound of my breathing and the distant drip of water. When I moved again, the murmurs instantly returned, shifting closer as if following me. Panic began to creep in at this point for me, but curiosity definitely pushed me forward still. I lowered myself down a narrow passage, squeezing through the cracks that scraped my arms and legs. The voices grew more distinct, though still unintelligible. And it was then that I realized that they weren't speaking words, at least not words that I could recognize. They were repeating sounds in patterns, almost like chanting. Occasionally, too, I thought that I could make out a single word, leave. But that might have just been my imagination. I'm not sure. In any case, I found a large underground chamber, its ceiling so high that I could barely see it in the dim light of my headlamp. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth, and the floor was uneven, covered in wet stones. The murmuring was much louder here, though, echoing off the walls and dripping down the unseen tunnels. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, a sound that wasn't quite sound, more like pressure pressing against my bones. And then I heard it clearly. I swear to you that I heard a voice directly behind me, soft and cold, say, "You shouldn't be here." Instantly I spun around, but there was nothing, just darkness before me. My flashlight quickly swept the chamber, catching the slick rock walls and scattered puddles, but nothing else. I called out, trying to convince myself that somebody must be playing a joke on me. Hello? Is anyone there? My voice was literally swallowed immediately by the cavern, leaving only the whispers in response. Well, that was enough for me. I decided that it was now time to leave. Every step back toward the narrow passage felt slower, heavier, as if the cave itself resisted me. The murmuring followed me, undulating around me like water. I didn't run, but I moved as quickly as I could, heart hammering, adrenaline slicing through the fear. Finally, I reached the entrance, sunlight spilling over my face, warm and very comforting. I looked back at the fissure, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows or something, but there was nothing. Just the quiet forest, birds chirping, and the wind in the trees. I truly don't know what that was. I don't know if it was just echoes, my imagination, or something else entirely. I have returned to other caves many times, but I've never gone back to that one, that's for sure. There's a part of me that wants to understand what the calling was from the darkness, but there's also a deep instinctive knowledge that some places in the earth are just meant to remain alone, and that voices underground, well, that ain't normal. Even now, months later, I still think about that place, and when I think about those whispers, it always gives me chills. I remember the chill of the cavern, that feeling of being watched, and I know for sure that I will never, ever be returning to that cave ever again. I don't usually talk about this, but every so often, a memory from when I was about 12 comes crawling back to me, and it still makes my skin crawl. This wasn't the kind of campfire scary story that you laugh off later. It was something that could have very easily ended with a few kids dead in the dirt. That summer, I spent a lot of time roaming the neighborhood with 3 friends. Evan, who was 11, his cousin Tori, who was 12, and his little brother Max, who was 9. Sometimes my younger cousin Lena, 9, would also follow us around, though we mostly saw her as a bit of a tag-along. And one afternoon, we got bored and I suggested that we sneak off to a little hideout that I had found behind some fences. It wasn't much, just an overgrown gap with a few old chairs and some junk that we had dragged in, but to us it felt like a secret clubhouse. We slipped through the narrow space and we settled in, laughing and messing around, feeling like explorers in our own little world. And that was when we saw her. At first it was just movement on the other side of the fence, a figure swaying or muttering to herself. When she turned toward us, I realized that it was a woman, bare-chested, hair sticking out in clumps, her skin sort of grey and blotched like she hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. Her eyes locked onto us, and she started screaming about how we didn't belong there, how they had sent us to spy on her. The air went cold suddenly, and none of us dared move. Then Tori stepped on a stick, and the crack echoed through the clearing. The woman shrieked, ducked into her yard, and re-emerged with a rifle clutched in her hands. The first gunshot split the air, and we didn't wait for a second. We bolted, sprinting along the endless length of the fence, dirt kicking up under our shoes as more shots exploded behind us. Her aim, thankfully, was wild, bullets snapping into the trees, dirt spraying at our heels. But the sound, the raw violence of it, made every step feel like we were just seconds away from collapsing face first into blood and silence. I will never forget the look of her face as I glanced back, eyes glowing with rage, lips pulled tight over broken teeth, her hands jerking as she fought the weight of the weapon. She wasn't aiming like someone who wanted to scare us. She was genuinely aiming like someone who didn't care if a child's body dropped on her lawn. We burst into Evan's backyard, lungs burning, legs rubbery. Lena was still there, frozen in place, and I yanked her inside without a word. Evan's mum was already on the phone with the police, her voice trembling as she reported the gunfire. The officers eventually arrived, their lights cutting through the dusk, and dragged the woman away kicking and cursing. I remember her face pressed against the window of the patrol car, eyes wide and burning holes through each of us as if promising that she would remember. It's been years since then, but I can still feel that fence stretching on forever. I can still hear the shots cracking behind me sometimes, and sometimes I dream about running and never making it back, about hearing her footsteps catching up to us. A few weeks back, I had an experience that I still cannot shake. It was well past midnight, and I just left a friend's small get-together downtown. The streets were nearly empty, and the air had that cold, sharp edge that makes you feel a bit exposed. I had ordered a rideshare like usual, expecting a quick and uneventful trip home. When my driver arrived, everything seemed perfectly normal at first. The car was the right make and model, the driver's face matched the app photo, and he greeted me politely too. So I buckled in and we started moving along the quiet streets. After about 15 minutes, we pulled into a dimly lit gas station tucked off the main road. He slowed the car to stop and turned in the seat to face me. "Hey, my cousin's going to take over the rest of the trip," he said. "His car's over there." He nodded toward a dark sedan idling across the lot. Immediately, a cold knot formed in my stomach. That car wasn't marked at all, and the man inside wasn't moving. His head was sort of tilted slightly forward, his eyes fixed straight ahead as if he hadn't even noticed the world around him. I froze in my seat though, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. No, I said quietly, trying to mask my panic. "I think I'll just stay here. You can finish the ride." My voice sounded a bit shaky, even to my own ears. The driver leaned back, a faint, almost unreadable expression on his face, and insisted that switching would be easier. I fumbled for my phone, pretending to call the rideshare support line. I held it up where he could see and said loudly, "Yes, I'm still in my assigned car. The license plate is..." and I recited the number from memory, adding extra emphasis on each digit. For the first time since the ride began too, the driver's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't say a word. He started the car slowly, drove past the dark sedan, and didn't speak again until we pulled up outside of my apartment. But even now, thinking back, I cannot shake the way that he didn't argue or try to coax me after that. It was like my sudden display of authority, real or imagined, had flipped some invisible switch. I never did see his cousin, and honestly, I never want to. The whole thing just left a lingering sense of dread too, and it didn't fade until I was safely inside of my building again. And I guess that's what chills me the most too. It wasn't just a weird driver, but something about the other car, the silent man inside, the sudden suggestion to switch. It felt deliberate, like someone was testing how easy it would be to get me to go along with it. I still check the cars carefully whenever I order a ride now too. So I booked a last-minute solo getaway to clear my head. A tiny cabin called Maple Hollow, about an hour and a half out of our city. I was fried from work, restless, and I figured that a night alone with my rescue dog Milo and a bottle of wine would do me good. The listing looked cozy too. Updated bathroom, a wood stove, big windows facing the trees, all that stuff. It promised peace and privacy. So I packed a hoodie, some snacks, Milo's blanket, and hit the road on Friday evening. The town on the way was the kind that puts out plastic pumpkins in October and serves 2 sweet pie at the diner. I grabbed a bottle of local red, dinner at a place with a handwritten chalkboard menu, and then turned off the highway into the gravel spur that led up into the Oaks. The last 5 minutes of the drive felt like slipping under the skin of the world, though. The trees closed over the road, and my reception died somewhere behind the last bend. That was fine with me, though. I mean, I'd been craving silence, to be honest. The cabin sat back from the drive, a single-story box with a screened porch and big panes of glass. Inside was small and clean. A kitchenette, a simple bed, a sitting area with the wood stove already prepped, and a tidy little bathroom. I built a fire, opened the wine, and watched the orange light eat the dark. Milo dozed at my feet while the forest breathed outside of the windows. At some point after 11, the quiet felt right. I put the fire out, did the porch light, and climbed into bed. Milo's ears picked up some little noises, twigs, a far-off animal, and his head lifted every time that there was a creak. I told myself I was being stupid, that the dark just was playing tricks on you when you're alone like that. But roughly 45 minutes after I'd turned the light off, I heard a single soft knock at the front door. My heart did that stupid drop thing like you get in bad movies. I laid still though and waited. Another knock, a little more deliberate this time. I reached for my phone out of habit and remembered that I had no bars. The app wouldn't dial and the owner wouldn't text. My brain started inventing problems. The host needs help. Some lost hiker thinks that the cabin is their emergency shelter. All reasonable-sounding thoughts filtered through my head until practicality fell away and raw fear arrived. I flipped the porch light on and peered through the small square of the glass next to the door. A man stood there, in the yellow halo of the lamp that he was holding. He wasn't yelling, didn't bang or try the handle, but he was close enough to be heard if we had spoken. He looked older than I expected. Late 30s, rumpled coat, breath fogging the air. He saw me at once, and the instant my face appeared, he tipped his head like a dog listening. What do you want?" I managed. He shrugged, half smile with no warmth. I need to get in," he said casually. "My truck's broke. I'm cold." There was a pause where, for some reason, my brain tried to do the polite thing, offer help, before the part of me that knows better kicked in. "Well, you can't just come in. This is private property," I said. He then made a tiny, weird movement toward the door, like he expected me to unlock it for him without complaint. Then he said the words that made me feel like someone had broken a seal inside of my chest. "I just need someone to keep me warm." His voice had 2 layers, the text of the sentence and an implication underneath it that made my skin crawl. The sentence in that moment translated as something else entirely. I said what I thought would scare him. "I have no bars, I have a doorbell camera, and I'll call the sheriff as soon as I get service." I didn't have a doorbell camera. I'd never even asked the owner if they'd installed one. I'd always been the kind of person who improvises though, and in my head the "I'll call" line sounded concrete and sharp enough to cut him out of the light. He looked at me for a long beat, then turned away without another word and walked back toward the tree line. I watched him go, watched the brush ripple as he moved, watched headlights briefly blink on in the distance, the glow of a pickup easing backward down the driveway, and then the lot was still again. But my fear, it didn't unspool when he left. If anything, it tightened. I stayed awake for the rest of the night too. I pushed a small dresser and a folding chair against the door after checking every lock and window. Milo was an unhelpful sentinel. He twitched and growled at pretty much nothing, and whenever a shadow moved near a pane of glass, he would snap to full attention. I pretended that I was safe, but I sat bolt upright for hours, listening for footsteps that might never come. By dawn, the world thankfully looked ordinary again. Dull pewter trees, a thin mist, the low chatter of birds starting their work for the day. There was no sign of the man anywhere. I packed slow, though, shaking my hands that were still trembling a little bit, and drove out the same gravel track that I had taken in. Halfway down the drive, I finally got a sliver of reception and finally texted the host. Someone knocked on my door last night and said that he needed to come in. He said that he needed to get warm, and he left after I said that I'd call the sheriff. I'm heading out now. There was no immediate answer. In fact, there was no answer for a while. When they did reply, they were polite and apologetic. No knowledge of anything like that, and no previous reports. They even offered to refund and to file a report on my behalf, and I told myself the sensible things as I drove back toward the city. I mean, maybe he'd been a drunk camper. Maybe he was lost or something. Or maybe I just overreacted. I filed no police report that morning. Life wanted to begin again. Monday meetings, a dog groomer's appointment, emails stacked like plates, and it's always easier to let discomfort dissolve into the noise like that. But then, 2 months later, I was scrolling a local neighborhood feed and I saw a single photo pinned to a community watch post. The same coat, the same crooked sputter of a smile, a man standing beside a country gas pump. The caption read that several residents in that area had reported seeing a man circling cabins at night. Someone had posted a camera still from a store where he had ducked in at midnight, and the angle matched the shape of the man that I had seen outside the door that night. I instantly called the host, and this time their voice tightened when they told me that they had received a complaint a week after my stay about a stranger knocking on the door at roughly the same time on a different night. That person had thought that it was a prank, and suddenly their refund offer felt very small in my hand. I don't know whether he intended anything worse than just asking for shelter. I don't know whether the photos on the feed prove that he was planning this everywhere or that he was just a chronically homeless man with a broken compass. But what I do know is the small solid fact of the knock and the way that he said that he needed to be warm and the way that my chest flattened when I realized that I'd been visible, alone, and uncontactable in a tiny house in the trees, practically in the middle of nowhere like that. I still go on trips from time to time, but I certainly travel differently now. I always carry a little panic alarm now, a second phone that I test before I park, and a hard plastic flashlight that feels like a small baton. I learned to trust the sharpness that makes you speak loudly when someone tastes wrong, and sometimes when the wind is thin and the world is settling down, I think about that man at my door and what would have happened if I'd gone outside to open it. That memory doesn't visit often, but when it does, it certainly has teeth for me. Not the fear of what happened, but the quiet, ugly knowledge of what just might have been. When I was about 7, my younger brother and I had already gone to bed, tucked under thick blankets in our shared room. It was one of those quiet, ordinary nights where the house seemed almost too peaceful, and the streetlights outside glowed faintly through the curtain, casting long shadows across the walls. Our parents were still awake, Mum in the living room watching a late-night talk show, Dad down in the basement tinkering with his computer setup like he often did. In those days, we didn't lock the doors. Our neighborhood always felt pretty safe, like nothing really bad could ever happen. It must have been around 11 p.m. though, the kind of time where even the air feels heavy. Mum's quiet hum of the conversation with the TV was suddenly interrupted. The back door banged open with a force that made the whole house shiver. Mum froze immediately. The air seemed to tighten around her throat. There was no knock, no warning, just the sound of the door swinging open and footsteps entering into the living room. A man had come in. My mum later told us that the first thing that she noticed was the silence. He didn't say a word, didn't hesitate or ask anything. He just started moving around the living room toward her. Every instinct screamed danger. She tried to form words and barely managed. "What do you want?" Her voice shaking, but she made it audible enough for the house to hear. Something clicked, though Mum never really fully understood what, but she yelled Dad's name as loudly as she could, and he came flying up the stairs from the basement. In a split second, the man paused, and for the first time, Mum felt a flicker of hope. The second that his eyes met Dad's, he bolted. Just like that, he vanished through the door as fast as he had come, leaving the living room empty and still once more. Mum later explained that she had a sense that the intruder had meant harm, that her voice alone wouldn't have been enough to scare him off. Dad being there changed the equation. She said that it felt like he had a presence that she couldn't fully see, like the man had known that there was someone stronger, someone capable of stopping whatever he had intended. The police, they were called immediately, but there was nothing to find. No fingerprints, no forced entry besides the unlocked door, no sign of the man anywhere nearby either. Mum never saw him again too, and the memory of that night became a story that she told us repeatedly as we grew up, always emphasizing the sense of danger that came in sudden silence and the strange, almost supernatural timing of Dad arriving just when he did, and also always reminding us to lock our doors. Years later, I asked Mum if she thought that the man had really intended something terrible, and she said that she had no doubt. What haunted her the most wasn't the idea of him entering the home. It was the feeling of just complete vulnerability, the sharp awareness that if Dad hadn't have come up at that exact moment, that she couldn't be sure what would have happened. The memory lingered like a shadow in the corners of our home for years, making Mum triple-check the locks and install extra lights, even though technically nothing ever happened. It was a night that left all of us, even us as children, with a deep sense of unease. For Mum, it became a quiet reminder. Sometimes the difference between fear and safety is someone showing up exactly when they're needed, even if it does feel like magic or luck. And for me and my brother, it became a lesson that we were never to forget. Always to be aware, always respect that thin line between comfort and danger, and especially in the places that feel the safest. I've spent over 8 years now working in funeral services, and in all that time I've always considered myself a skeptic when it comes to ghosts or the afterlife. I've been around death constantly though, embalming, cremating, arranging services, you name it. But I never really believed in anything beyond what I could see or touch. Well, at least that was until today. We've been in the process of relocating our funeral home from an old Victorian building into a newer facility. The old place had charm, sure, but it was drafty, creaky, and more than a little eerie at times. Its basement was especially unsettling. Rows and rows of boxes sat along the walls, holding unclaimed ashes going back decades, some from as early as the 1960s even. I'd always known about them, but I never spent more than a cursory glance at the labels, really. Today, I was tasked with sorting and bagging the unclaimed ashes for transport to the crematorium. I had headphones in, listening to a true crime podcast, zoning out as I moved hundreds of boxes. It was routine, mundane, repetitive. One box in and another box out, rinse and repeat. My mind was elsewhere, I guess you could say, only sort of half present, ticking off tasks. and that was when it happened. I was lifting a small light box into a bag when it felt like something slammed into my consciousness. Not with sound and not with words, but just sort of a feeling that echoed in my mind. No. It was sharp, commanding, and impossible to ignore. I froze instantly. My arm stopped mid-motion, the box suspended above the bag. My brain scrambled to rationalize. A muscle spasm, fatigue, stress from moving hundreds of boxes. But none of it made sense. I had never experienced anything like this before. I glanced down at the box in my hands and only then noticed what I had almost done. The small box that I was about to bag was labeled Eleanor Riggs. Sitting directly on top of it, barely noticeable in the dim light, was a smaller box labeled Infant Riggs. A mother and her child separated by accident, mere seconds from happening. I hadn't even read the labels before. I was moving boxes as fast as possible to clear the basement. My hands shook as I set both boxes carefully on a nearby table. My brain refused to accept what had just occurred. I'm used to dealing with grief, with tragedy, with the absolute finality of death, but something about this, the almost supernatural intervention, rattled me in a way that I still find hard to explain. Mind you, I hadn't been startled by a noise or a shadow. It was as though someone or some unseen presence had just reached into my brain and made me stop. Well, I backed away, listening to the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above me and the distant sound of the traffic outside. The basement, usually quiet, except for the faint creaking of the building settling, now felt heavy all of a sudden. Every shadow seemed longer. Every box along the shelves seemed to hum with the weight of memory and loss. I started to examine the other boxes more carefully, reading names that I'd previously ignored. Decades of strangers' lives suddenly feeling like more than just names on cardboard. For the rest of the day, I kept thinking about Eleanor and her baby. How long had they been waiting there, unclaimed, for someone to notice them? Had I almost disrespected them by separating them like that? And more than that, what the heck had stopped me? Was it instinct, coincidence, or something else entirely? I've never experienced anything like it, and I cannot shake the sense that I just wasn't alone in that basement that day. To be clear, too, I don't feel scared. Well, not in the traditional sense, I guess. But I certainly feel unsettled, perplexed, and small in a way that is hard to explain. There's a weight to the thought that maybe some things are beyond our understanding, that perhaps in some way the dead can still intervene, can still protect each other, and can still reach out to the living when something is about to go wrong. Even now, hours later, I can still feel that pause in my mind, that sharp word no that stopped me cold like that. I cannot explain it logically, but I cannot dismiss it either. But what I do know deep down is that I will never forget Eleanor and her baby, or the moment that I felt something truly beyond this world for the first time. For those unfamiliar with my line of work, I've been employed at the County Detention Center for over a decade. Over the years, I've seen some things too that just really don't make much sense. Things that I wouldn't just tell anyone, because most people would think that I was exaggerating or making it up. Among the veteran staff, there's a bit of a running joke here too. There's a bit of a running joke whenever a new recruit swears that they don't believe in ghosts. We always just smile and say, well, you will. Most of the rookies just sort of laugh it off. Some stop laughing after a few months, and others it takes a little bit longer, but inevitably, it always happens. Now, a few weeks ago, I had an encounter that reminded me why the joke exists. The detention center has an old wing that was built back in the early 1980s. A portion of that wing used to house a courtroom, complete with benches bolted to the floor, a small witness stand, and a judge's podium at the front. About 10 years ago, I would say, the county built a brand new courtroom, so the old one is mostly used for storage now. Office supplies, boxes of files, and miscellaneous equipment sit along the benches and in the corners. Most of the newer staff don't remember, or perhaps even never knew, that there is a small bathroom tucked behind the courtroom next to the exit door. The veterans, they know it well though, and for years it's been our quiet go-to spot. The room is usually kept dark. The only light comes from the window in the door. There's a switch on the far wall though, but most of us rarely turn it on. It's just never really been necessary. Now, I was working a night shift recently, the kind where the hours just drag on and on. I entered the old courtroom to use the bathroom at one point. Everything was as expected, quiet, dim and familiar. I finished my business and stepped out, and that was when I noticed something strange. The light spilling in from the open bathroom door revealed a figure sitting on one of the wooden benches near the front of the room. My heart skipped a beat upon seeing them there. The bathroom door closed behind me, plunging the room back into dim shadows, but the shape remained visible. Honestly, at first I thought someone was just playing a prank on me. Maybe a coworker had snuck in without my noticing. I reached for my flashlight on my belt and aimed it at the figure. In the beam, I saw the back of a man's head, dark brown hair, slightly unkempt. I called out, "Hey," my voice portraying more nervousness than I intended. But nothing, just silence. I double-pressed the flashlight to activate the strobe function, thinking that the disorienting light would get a reaction. When the light flickered and danced across the benches, the figure was just gone. My pulse was suddenly racing. I switched on the main overhead light and searched the room thoroughly, but there was no one there. I checked under the benches, behind the stacks of boxes, even along the edges of the room, but no one. I walked over to the spot where the figure had been sitting, and I rested my hand on the bench, and the wood was oddly warm. And not just room temperature warm, the kind of warmth left behind by someone who had recently been sitting there. Goosebumps ran up my arms instantly. And I left that room pretty quickly, heart still hammering, and tried to shake off the unease a bit. The next morning I asked my supervisor about it. He's been at the jail since the early 1980s, calm, rational, no-nonsense type of person who doesn't jump to conclusions or indulge in ghost stories. But when I described what I saw, he just sort of nodded knowingly. He told me that while he's never personally experienced anything in the old courtroom, court officers who he respected used to report odd occurrences when the room was still active. Papers mysteriously moved, pens knocked over, objects slightly out of place. Once security cameras were installed, the activity seemed to stop though. When the courtroom was decommissioned and the cameras were removed, those oddities returned. According to him, the space might still be haunted by the echoes of its past or something. People who spend hours there for work, for trial, for justice, for punishment, all that. Since that night, though, I've certainly taken extra precautions whenever I enter the old courtroom. Lights always go on immediately now. I check behind the doors and under the benches before moving further in, too. The room, it always gives me pause now, and I always feel the weight of the history in there now. I cannot explain what I saw that night, rationally anyway. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, logically, there should be a simple answer, but I know what I saw, and I know how it felt. The warmth of a phantom presence like that, the figure that just vanished into thin air, and The absolute certainty that the room was not empty. Sometimes when I pass by that old courtroom, even in daylight, I swear that I can feel someone sitting in there, just watching and waiting. And I know beyond reason that if you ever doubt what the veterans say, you will, you often find out sooner than you think. It was a regular Thursday night, the kind where everything just feels a bit mundane. My partner and I were on the couch, winding down after a long day. We had MasterChef on in the background, a comforting, familiar ritual, really. She had already taken her medication, which usually meant that she would head to bed sooner rather than later. I had offered to stay with her a little while as she drifted off, something that we had done for months. After the episode ended, she got up and did her usual safety checks. She goes room to room, making sure every window is shut and every door is locked. It's something that she can't sleep without doing, really. Again, a ritual that's always been part of her nightly routine. I followed her upstairs to our bedroom, just to lie next to her until she would fall asleep. We had barely been in bed for maybe 15 seconds when it started. At first, I thought that I was imagining it, a faint tapping sound in the distance. But then it grew louder, clearer, more deliberate. A clacking or dragging noise, like someone walking heavily across the kitchen floor. Even with the bedroom door closed, the sound carried through the walls, and I was unsure what I was hearing. She immediately grabbed her phone and called her friend. I could hear the faint panicked voice on the other end as she explained what was happening. Meanwhile, the sound in the kitchen continued, heavy, methodical moving from one side of the room to the other, as if somebody was pacing back and forth. I was frozen, unsure whether to investigate or just sort of stay put. It went on for 2, maybe 3 minutes, and then just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise just stopped. There was an eerie silence too, the kind of silence that is worse than hearing sound, pressing in from every corner of the house. I cautiously unlocked the bedroom door and stepped out, but every room that I checked, they were empty. The front and the back doors were locked, every window was secure, nothing had been disturbed, no signs of forced entry and no misplaced objects, nothing. I walked back to the bedroom, my mind racing. Could it have been an animal? Maybe a stray rodent or a raccoon somehow got into the home? But no, the clacking was way too loud, too deliberate. It sounded like boots against the floor. Could it have been a hallucination? Both of us had been awake the whole evening, no alcohol and no medication beyond what she regularly takes. And I certainly don't take anything. I mean, the more I thought about it, there was no explanation that just really made any sense. We sat on the bed for another half an hour listening and waiting for anything else, but nothing ever happened. I eventually managed to calm down enough to fall asleep in the end, though every little noise in the house kept me on edge for the rest of the night for sure. The next day, I inspected the kitchen carefully, and I mean every cabinet, every drawer, every appliance, but nothing was out of place. I rechecked the locks, the windows, the perimeter of the home. Everything was secure. No one had been inside, except for us, and I just couldn't explain it. Even now, weeks later, the memory of that night just still gives me chills. I check every door twice before bed as well now. I still glance into the kitchen whenever I hear the slightest creak, and sometimes, just sometimes, I swear that I hear that deliberate clack again, just for a moment, and I have no idea what it is. Whatever it is, I'm pretty confident that it wasn't human. That much, at least, seems to be certain. When I first started working in elder care, I thought that it would be quiet and a routine job. I was 19, eager for independence, and didn't give much thought to the building itself, an old facility that had been around since the late 1800s. The original structure, it had been a home for elderly women, but over the decades, a modern wing had been added with semi-assisted apartments. On my first day, the place looked normal, almost charming in its aged way, though there was an undercurrent of something that I just couldn't yet identify. I had been warned by other staff that the building had a reputation, but I brushed it off. My real concern was the ancient elevator, a clunky 1960s model that occasionally trapped people inside of it. In hindsight, that was almost comforting compared to what I would eventually experience. The first unsettling stories I heard, they didn't involve me directly. Like, there was a resident on the second floor of the main building, a devout woman who constantly requested assistance. She claimed that spirits were trying to hurt her, sometimes yelling about the devil chasing her. Staff who entered her room reported hearing whispers and low growls through their walkie-talkies. Eventually, she was moved, but the room retained a sort of strange energy, I guess you could say. Knocks and soft scraping sounds continued to emanate from the empty space, too. My first personal experience happened not long after this as well. The top floor had a narrow hallway shaped like an H, with a small fridge positioned in the middle corridor. And while stocking it one afternoon, I noticed a figure gliding toward me. She was a woman dressed in an immaculate Victorian white gown, her hair pinned in a classic updo. She hovered above the floor, no feet, no shadow, and silently vanished before I could even react. Staff later referred to her as the White Lady, and after that day, I refused to stock the fridge alone. There were also shadow figures too. Like on late night shifts, the kitchen and the dining area were sometimes empty, but for me, the dark humanoid shapes would flit across the room, always. One evening, while mopping, I saw a large shadow that looked almost human, but was darker than any clothing that I had ever seen. It moved between tables, ducked behind stoves, and just watched me, seemingly aware of my every motion. Older staff explained that these shadows often gathered where sadness or trauma lingered, drawn to vulnerability, particularly among the elderly. Then, there were the moments linked to death. I witnessed a full-body apparition of a resident sitting at her usual dining chair, her eyes now entirely black. Later that day, I learned that she had passed at the hospital, and another resident died in the shower, and for a week afterward, her call bell would ring at the exact hour that she had died. The newer apartments were starkly different, though, bright, modern, and seemingly free from history. Still, though, staff agreed that something malevolent resided in the basement there, the storage areas, and even the elevator. The basement had a small activity room for residents, adjacent to laundry and storage. It was dimly lit and very long with a single flickering aisle light. Many reported a sort of suffocating or oppressive feeling when entering there, as if unseen eyes were watching every movement. Trash runs became a dreaded chore for everyone, and some staff would simply leave garbage in the hallway rather than step into the space alone at night. Personally, too, I never saw the little girl that some co-workers spoke of, a child in a red dress apparently, but I did often feel a crushing presence while delivering meals. Paper placemats sometimes flew off the tables for no reason, too. And one day, a heavy wooden chair lurched across the floor and turned toward me, almost as if someone invisible just wanted to sit there and watch me. It was undeniable as well, physical evidence of something in that room. The elevator, though, was the most disturbing. Multiple staff, including my mother who worked there at one point, reported a sudden freezing chill, followed by a crushing pressure on their back, sometimes simulating hands around the throat, and it felt impossibly strong, restricting breathing until the doors opened. I personally experienced that several times, each incident leaving me rattled and uncertain how to continue working. What unsettled me most, though, was that the apartment wing had no history of death or intense trauma, nothing to explain the malevolence. My mother, who had known the land's previous owners, could find no reason for what resided there now. Whatever it was, it just didn't seem to belong to the building's history of human sorrow or loss. It was older, colder, and darker than anything that I had ever experienced. Eventually, I left that job though, and I no longer drive past the property if I can avoid it. But even now, years later, I cannot forget the oppressive weight of that basement, the floating figure in white, or the silent shadows stalking the kitchen. The memory lingers, a constant reminder that some places collect more than just memories. They keep the things that should never be seen. I never expected a routine hike to leave me questioning reality, but that morning in the remote countryside of southeast England, it did just that. My husband and I had set out early, hoping to enjoy a few quiet hours on a rarely used trail near an old nature reserve that we knew of. The mist hung low over the rolling hills, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain as storm clouds gathered overhead. We had been walking for nearly an hour at this point, well off any marked paths, and I was beginning to regret leaving the main trail. We decided to try a shortcut back to the car as the first distant rumbles of thunder began to echo across the hills. The undergrowth, it grew thick and tangled, but we noticed what looked like a faint trail, more like a path carved by repeated footsteps or small animals than a maintained trail by any means, but my husband, curious and ever the adventurer, decided to check it out while I stayed behind, not wanting to push through the thorny brambles unless I had no other choice. He disappeared into the brush for a few minutes, and I waited, picking my way carefully along the rough ground. Then I heard his voice, unusually hesitant. You're not going to believe this. I'm just going to back off, okay?" Moments later, he returned, his face pale and eyes wide, the kind of look that freezes you in place without understanding why. "What happened?" I asked. He could barely speak at first. Then he described what he had seen, something that defied every rational explanation. It was like a jellyfish, but flying. Not floating on the water, but in the air, drifting side to side like it had its own rhythm. It was sort of donut-shaped, kind of oval with a dimple in the center, with the tendrils sort of dangling around the edge, and yellow spots all over it. Brown and not transparent and about the size of my hand. It was low, like it was just hovering above the grass. I stared at him, half expecting this to be a joke, but his expression was too serious. He insisted that he had never seen anything like this in his life and had no reason to lie, and when I asked why he hadn't taken a picture or a video, he just shook his head. I don't know. I couldn't think. It just kind of froze me, like I wasn't in control of what I was doing. I just sort of watched it move and, well, then it was gone before I even knew it. After a few minutes of silence, he returned to the same spot, hoping to find evidence. He filmed the area carefully, circling the small clearing where he had seen it, but when we reviewed the footage, there was nothing. The grass swayed in the wind, the light shifted, but no shape, no color, no jellyfish-like object. We drove home in silence that day. On the ride, we tried to reason it out. A leaf caught in the wind, a trick of the sunlight, a butterfly, or a cluster of debris. But none of those explanations really matched what he described. The slow, deliberate motion, the hovering in midair, the almost liquid rhythm. He was frustrated, I could tell, unsettled and strangely haunted, I would say, by the experience. Back at home, I couldn't stop thinking about what he saw. I went online searching forums for encounters like this, strange flying creatures, cryptids, or unexplained aerial phenomena. Some stories were similar: hovering, jellyfish-shaped creatures, ghostly lights in rural areas. Others seemed outright fictional, but still, there were enough accounts to make my stomach tighten a little bit. Even now, a week later, I cannot shake that image. I keep imagining that quiet clearing, the storm clouds pressing down, and that impossible little creature drifting like it had purpose, observing us. My husband has kept returning in his mind, imagining what it might have been, frustrated that the footage shows nothing, and just desperate for logic. I keep wondering if I had followed him, if I had seen it too, would I have felt the same hypnotic awe, the sense that something alive but utterly alien had just crossed our path? I truly don't know if it was a trick of the mind, a rare natural phenomenon, or something else entirely, because I didn't see it. But I do know one thing. That day in the middle of nowhere, under the darkening sky, we both felt the undeniable presence of something that didn't belong to the ordinary world. And whatever it was, it's still out there, drifting and waiting and, who knows, maybe even watching. When this happened, I was finishing a master's program and had to present a small academic symposium out of town. Nothing glamorous, a requirement to graduate, but the event was run by an undergrad committee, and that was where I met her, a student volunteer who helped presenters find rooms and juggle schedules. Her name was not the one that she used online, so I'll call her Claire. At first, Claire seemed perfectly ordinary, chipper, efficient, a little too familiar for my taste, but not alarming by any means. She handled logistical questions, directed me to the right seminar room, and kindly offered to photocopy a handout that I needed for my talk. She was a few years younger than me and bubbly in a way that made a lot of presenters grateful to have her on their side. I chalked any oddness up to just energetic youth. Well, after the session, we briefly crossed paths in the library. She asked about my paper, then asked for a few references. I emailed her what she wanted, thinking nice, polite, helpful. A few days later, she asked if we could meet so I could glance over her draft. I refused, though. Office hours were the sensible route, but she persisted about needing a particular book that I happened to own and no longer used. So I decided to be practical. I'd hand the book to her in person, 5 minutes in the campus library, and that would be the end of it. The handoff took about a minute. I pushed the book into her arms, kept my face impassive, and then I just left. She watched me go with a strange, delighted expression that sat wrong with me a little bit. I shrugged it off as just an awkward gratitude, but then the small stuff started. A week later, my phone buzzed. I had not given her my number, but somehow she had dug it up from a conference participant list. Her first message was breezy. "Thank you. Hope the refs helped." Her next messages read, oddly intimate. "Why not make it a little more personal?" I didn't reply. I was in a committed relationship then, serious enough that I'd already spoken to my partner about things, so the message felt invasive and very unwelcome. Soon after, friends began to ask me, conversationally at first, "Are you seeing that Claire girl?" I laughed it off, but the tone soon changed when one of them slid me screenshots. Claire had a private social account that some of our mutual acquaintances followed. On it, she had made me the core of a one-sided narrative. My username in her bio, photos of the library with captions like "our little date," We had not been on a date though, and posts that framed our brief interaction as something tender and ongoing. At first, the posts were quirky but nauseating. What I mean is that she wrote as if we were an actual couple. He looked tired today. I wanted to tuck him in. She referenced the 5-minute book handoffs as our library date. She never tagged me, mind you, but she knew enough about my online presence to post subliminal messages aimed at me. If I tweeted about a difficult day, she'd follow with, "I'll make his day better." The accounts that saw it were small, but the tone was possessive, I guess, and in hindsight, downright sinister. Then the post shifted. The tone became accusatory. She tweeted that I had ghosted her, called me ungrateful, and, most alarmingly, wrote that she would not accept somebody else taking me. One line in particular made my stomach flip. "If someone is with him, I'll make them regret it." That was the moment that the whole thing stopped being a creepy crush and became potentially dangerous. I didn't know how far she had taken it. Had she mentioned my name to people? Had she been telling my colleagues some fabricated story about us being involved? I blocked her on every platform that I could find, and I told my partner everything immediately, screenshots and all. She believed me too, which was a relief, and she urged me to tell others who might be affected. A few people that I trusted spread the word in our cohort. This woman had a pattern too of recasting innocent exchanges into romantic narratives. That pattern was the scariest part in my mind. A friend later told me though that she had seen Claire do the same thing to another student, invent dates, tweet infatuated posts, and then flip to rage if the attention didn't swing in her direction. It had happened more than once apparently. When my program ended, I moved away, partially because I needed distance and partially because the idea of bumping into Claire in the department felt suffocating. I thought that the physical relocation would close the chapter too, and it helped, but it never really erased the unease. And I guess the thing that haunts me isn't merely the fact that she invented a fantasy about us. It's that the fantasy could have been believed. In a blink, without context, my reputation, and worse, my perception of my partner, might have been upended by a narrative spun online by some crazy weirdo. Well, years later I still think about the tiny decisions that could have changed everything. If I had gone on that supposed library date because I wanted to be polite, if I'd given her my number, if I'd joked or flirted for even 5 seconds. None of those would have indicated real interest, but to someone constructing a story in which I was their lead, they would have been fuel for sure. I don't know what Claire wanted beyond attention or why she escalated into threats like that, but I do know this. People can weaponize social media to create convincing fictions, and when they place real people at the center of those fictions, the consequences can ripple outward quickly. So if you find yourself on the tail of somebody else's invented story, act quickly. Tell your partner, warn your friends, preserve screenshots. It's a small defense, but sometimes small things are the only things that blunt a much bigger danger. When I was 7 years old, I was showering alone and with the door shut. I was close to being done when suddenly the light, the fan, and the water turned off. There was a moment that I was in darkness. It felt like 3 to 5 seconds, and suddenly everything turned back on. When I looked out of the shower to see who was messing with me, I instantly froze cold. There was a tall and seemingly thick, darker than black silhouette of a being reflecting next to me outside of the shower, but only visible in the mirror. I was petrified and couldn't move or scream, and as quickly as it came, it suddenly vanished. I hurried up and grabbed my clothes and booked it down the stairs to where I attempted to speak to my mum. She told me to wait a minute, I'm on the phone. And so I waited about 2 minutes, and my mum returned from the garage and into the living room where I was seated, silent and confused, after what I just saw, and she said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but your dad passed away." At that moment, I didn't understand death, let alone ghosts or whatever I just saw, but I knew that something was wrong. I was terrified of the upstairs bathroom and would always use it or shower with the door wide open and panic internally if anyone tried to close it. I had a reoccurring nightmare about the bathroom where a monster or human woman would look down at her hands in the mirror and start screaming, and then look up at me still screaming very loudly until eventually I woke up. I spent a lot of time alone as a kid in the basement, but I certainly wasn't always alone. A buddy of mine was with me in the basement playing Guitar Hero one day, when suddenly a white, massive, thick cloud or mist, that's the best way that I can describe it, impossible to look through, zoomed out of one of the rooms to our right and disappeared at the wall. It was very quick, but I asked my friend if he saw that, and he said yes. I saw shadows while I was alone a few times, behind the bar area towards the storage unit, but I always pretended that I didn't see anything and assumed my mind was just playing tricks on me because I knew that I at least was scared of being in that basement. And yet, that's where some of the video games were, and I always did puzzles by myself down there too. But I just always felt like I was being watched. Another moment someone was with me was when I was in the office and my stepdad was helping me with homework, and we both looked up and saw a brown, sort of grey, white, black blur, is the only way that I can describe it, shoot up the stairs. I knew a little better by that age and asked him what did he see, and he responded saying something shot up the stairs. More years went by after my dad's death and ghostly shadowy encounters seemed to go away. My mum became an every-night alcoholic, gone 4 to 6 nights a week for years, and my stepdad hated me too. Often we had chaotic battles. I was terribly depressed between 10 to 19 years old. I blamed God for a lot of the problems in my life, constantly tried forming a relationship with the man in the clouds, but always felt rejection and as if everything was continually sort of just getting worse. My mum got caught cheating on him, thanks to me, and what I thought was a blessing with my mum being caught and me being forced into a stranger's couch, yet seeing my mum daily, became an absolute curse. I thought that since she was drinking at home, then that's a good thing. Yet she was overtly mean beyond logic, and was always hurling insults, trashing the place, and very, very angry at me, even though I really did no wrong. And I could have sworn several dozen times that I saw evil in her eyes, bloodshot red, crackling rude and violent. I've seen my mum crab walk after me while I was trying to get away from her once. She'd call the police on me while I was sleeping after she destroyed parts of the house. She called my PO to say that I was being violent. One day she hurt my brother and convinced him to blame me when questioned at school about it. Lucky me, I was in a temporary mental hospital for kids because she kicked me out and I slept in front of my school. When the teacher and the police asked why I had cigarettes, I responded wrong and said that I was depressed and they took me away. But quite honestly, I think that saved me from assault with deadly weapon charges. And yet, my mum was never arrested, as the truth never came out until a few years later somehow. My ex-stepdad showed me proof that she was apparently arrested the night before with assault with a dangerous weapon with regard to her current husband. Yet no cops connected the dots, and I guess it was just lucky for me that I had a solid alibi. But anyways, new house with the stepdad brought ghostly things as well. So one day, I was sitting on the couch after school and the doorbell rang. I got up, looked outside, and, well, nobody was there. I sat back down and the doorbell rang again, but twice this time. I hurried to the door and looked outside, looked down my street, and nobody was around. The dogs were also weirdly going ballistic this entire time, but When I sat back down, it rang 3 times before I could even sit down again, and I walked outside, walked around my house and back inside, just sort of checking around the house in case I was being pranked or something. Before I could even close that heavier door though, the doorbell rang super fast and didn't stop for a good 10 to 20 seconds. With dogs freaking out, I cussed at the potential ghost or demon that was there. It stopped, but I was definitely spooked by that. Another moment happened when I was outside on the phone talking to my dad's fiancée when he passed, and suddenly from the woods, I hear a faint yet audible help me in a woman's voice. I paused, looked towards the moonlit woods and continued my conversation. Then I heard a woman scream help me in a loud yet agonizing pitch. I lit another cigarette with Miss Joyce on the phone still, and I heard it again, but this time in a man's voice, and louder. It repeated itself this time, seemingly very angry, louder and closer. It sort of sounded like it was no longer in the woods too, but in the backyard, less than 50 feet from me. I knew that something paranormal and dark was happening, but curiosity for answers locked me in place. It screamed in rage one last time, and that's when I just booked it inside. Weirdly though, it sounded like it was next to me, yet all around me at the same time too. I still get goosebumps even sharing this some 12 plus years later. Now, after being kicked out so many times by my mother and never having a real place to go, I eventually became a thief. I stole from unlocked cars, and one day I stole a car even. And it landed me in prison. But the stories, they don't end here. You see, I had my girlfriend over who I was with before prison, and we were again at my mother's new husband's house, and I was going to meet my girlfriend down in the basement, my room, and start a puzzle like I always did. I was talking to my mum when my girl said that she was going downstairs. I quickly finished the conversation and went to follow her. Through the glass door of the basement though, I looked down and I saw my girlfriend's pale face staring back up at me from the bottom of the steps, and when I opened the door, she was no longer standing there. I turned on the light and proceeded down the steps, turned on the basement lights and looked around, and she wasn't down there at all. I said her name a few times, and when I went to go back upstairs, my girlfriend was at the top, asking me what I was doing, and I told her what just happened. She said that she had to use the bathroom first, and so she was there. I was puzzled by that, but not scared, I guess. And though this is a new event, I guess, this haunting stuff definitely wasn't. We did do a puzzle for the rest of the night, and then she left and came back the next day. We were in the far back of the basement, doing that said puzzle, and suddenly we hear a sharp shush sound from the opposite end towards the stairs. Slightly confused of what that sound was, not thinking that it was paranormal, we continued on. But again, it just sounded like someone was shushing us. It sounded clear audible, and I joked that maybe it's the furnace, yet the furnace was a good 15 to 20 feet away. This time we hear someone say "ah," but it moved to the left of the stairs to the basement kitchen area. Again we joked, maybe a rat in the air duct. Again the shushing sound. This time it moved by the furnace area though. And now I knew that something was going on. I scooted closer to her, facing the rest of the basement. We hear the shushing sound again. Like air escaping a tire is the only way that I can describe it. When suddenly, I saw a mirage-like form around the treadmill, and again that shushing sound. It was loud, and it was a 90+ degree angle away from where it started in the first place. I then explained to her I'm feeling rage, like I want to argue, but admit that I have no reason to be angry. Then the shushing sound. This time it was somewhere right in front of us. Then she jumped up and asked what, and she said that it was in her ear. And then the sound again, yet it was directly between us, surprising us both, and we both jumped in fact. I pushed her away from me to go upstairs, and I started calling this thing every name in the book and threatened it with the Bible, and after that, surprisingly, it just never did it again. We got a place in a hotel to be together every day until more money was saved. My mother was too hostile and drunk to be around. There were fights all the time, and my girl witnessed her bad side as well, finally. But at said hotel room, the light would turn on, and strangely also the sink. She said that she would see shadows in the dark, but I always said that we were just matrixing sort of shapes in the dark. But I could have sworn that I saw them as well. Surprisingly, since then, nothing much has happened. Yet, I just cannot say my life got any better. I've always felt like this thing follows me around, I guess. I know it's not my dad, and I suspect it to be truly evil, yet I just don't really know. I appreciate anyone hearing this, and I've struggled with this stuff for years. I believe the only reason that I believe in God is because I've witnessed this thing too. Yet now my stepdaughter and wife claim to see shadows at night, and I just hope that it's not all starting over again. Maybe I was vulnerable, but I shared a moment with other people, and all I can say is yes, ghosts or demons, I believe that they're real. If you don't, that's okay. I understand. I was once like that too, but for me, all of this is just all too real. So, this started on one of those meet new friends apps. I'm not just a huge loser, I swear. I moved to my current city during the pandemic and have a work from home position, so it just hasn't been the prime circumstances for a social life, I guess. In any case, I matched with this random girl. We'll call her Annie. I cannot remember if I saw her first or vice versa. Honestly, I was paying more attention to the profiles than the pictures, and she seemed okay. Spirituality came up somehow. I can't remember how this happened either, but to be fair, it could have been either of us. I've recently been more seriously following Norse paganism, but it wasn't something that I was seeking to explore with other people. It's mostly a private thing, I guess, not to mention that my own beliefs are more metaphorical than anything. But that doesn't mean that I'm closed to the experience entirely. So when she mentioned having a LGBTQ neurodivergent pagan femme coven, I was like, wow, okay, that's either very specific or very broad. But hey, why not? Maybe it'll be fun. So we agreed to meet first before I went to the event. One weird thing though that stuck out in our text conversation was that her partner was in some bizarre Scientology rehab. At first, I assumed that this was a place where one recovers from Scientology, but I did ask her if her partner was a Scientologist, and I never got an answer. In any case, we only met for an hour to have some coffee. I think more red flags would have popped up if I'd had more time, because the little things that went off on my radar were things that weren't that weird, I guess. Like, there were explanations, or I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. And me being stupid, didn't ask again about the Scientology thing. I kept meaning to Google Scientology rehab, but kept, just forgetting to do it really. I've since Googled it, and cannot find anything about a rehabilitation for ex-Scientologists, so I wish that I had done that sooner. There were, however, other things that really stuck out. They're relatively benign out of context, but putting everything together in retrospect made me feel, pretty dumb, I guess. For instance, she wouldn't answer any direct questions about herself, and not for a lack of asking too. I'm the kind of person who is conscious of when the attention is all on me, so it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't learn anything about her really. Most of what she said had to do with her spiritual awakening. Her spiritual awakening itself sounded weird too. She said that she had a realization that she was like a lighthouse that was drawing people toward their personal enlightenment. And okay, I did think that was weird, but She's from California. I don't know. Maybe that's normal there. I just chalked it up to her personal beliefs in any case, being whatever they were. Reincarnation came up too. Reincarnation is a big part of paganism, although Asatru additionally focuses on ancestors. She told me that she didn't think that she had any past lives and is a new soul, which really just doesn't make a lot of sense, but okay, whatever. Not my circus, not my monkeys. The vaguely supernatural elements that she placed on herself were strange though, but I know a lot of people want to feel special in life, so that didn't mean that I had to believe it. At one point, I told her about this random woman that I met at the pagan festival who tried to con me. She wanted to charge me so that I could be under her wing or whatever. I don't need someone to protect or guide me, so I declined, obviously. As I was telling this story, though, I could tell Annie was, well, conflicted. Like she wanted to agree, but didn't. Finally, she said something blasé, like how it was only inappropriate because the student should choose the teacher. So I clarified that I didn't want a teacher. Her responses were also very mirroring. I'm not a moron too. I was getting a weird sense that she wasn't being honest with me and that she was telling me things that I wanted to hear, and told myself that she was probably just nervous. I do have a pretty strong personality after all. I am very independent, so I can understand if someone wouldn't want to go up against the things that I said at our very first meeting. I know I'm just dumb at this point, but I didn't want to be paranoid too. I don't trust people easily, and I know that, so I was trying to loosen up and be a bit more chill. But yeah, that was a big mistake. But anyway, so yeah, I go to this thing and immediately it is weird. Immediately, the second that I step foot into that house, I'm very uncomfortable. It's filled with people and completely silent. Everyone is looking at me. I'm sort of laughing and saying hi, and no one is like really responding. And here I am awkwardly dropping my keys and phone while everyone is just watching me. Eventually, I take a seat on this short couch because there's just no room in the large circle. It's a very small living room and there are like 20 people circled up. There's a cushion on the couch, so I just sort of sit on that. The leader starts talking, and as she's going on, I'm looking around at the people there. I was curious, I guess, but out of the corner of my eye, I see the leader trying to look at me. The girl sitting in front of me is sort of partially blocking our view of each other, so the leader is like leaning over to try and meet my gaze. Finally, I felt awkward enough to like shift over so that I was leaning against the arm of the couch. Staying perched on a cushion was pretty uncomfortable by that point, so I sort of shifted off and spread out a bit to be more comfortable. The leader ended the speech with, "So spread out, I guess," which was clearly directed at me. It was said with some humor though, so I wasn't sure what to make of it at first. Everyone introduces themselves though and is their own unique brand of neurodivergent. I have ADHD, but I guess I don't subscribe to labels beyond the requirement to stay medicated. I've been medicated since 2015, so this isn't a new diagnosis for me or anything. That was the only question that we got asked about ourselves though, beyond our name. The leader guides us through this meditation, and people are making these weird breathing sounds and hums. And I mean, I get it. It's spiritual, right? Unfortunately, my ADHD butt can't focus to save my life, and it's impossible for me to follow the guided meditation. I just don't understand it. I mean, how can anyone with actual attention issues listen past trills and deep nose breathing like this? So I'm sitting there with eyes closed and barely paying attention because I just can't. But I do hear the leader say that we should think of anything that we'd want to ask her or need from her, and that got my attention. What the heck did I need to ask her, other than where the snacks were? Because I paid $8 and I don't see a single snack anywhere. Once the meditation ended though, Annie and the leader walked around to give us material for an activity. Annie gave me 2 long pieces of twine and the leader gave me 2 sticks. As the leader was handing me the sticks, I asked her where the snacks were and she was like, in the kitchen on the table where snacks tend to be. I'm a dry, sarcastic person, so I thought it was her brand of humor. I laughed and played along and went, "Oh, alright, I think I'll find them." Literally, she was deadpan though, unsmiling and just said, and then walked away. So stupid me thought that she might just be like that, but then I saw her laughing with the other girls and realized something was off. As the activity commenced, she went back over to Amy and started stroking her back, kissing her hair and giving me this creepy smile. Yeah, it was weird. I was really uncomfortable. I wanted to get up and go at this stage, but I couldn't. Why? Because of this activity. The activity was the last straw, but they wanted us to think of something that we wanted to discard that brought us pain. Then they wanted us to feel how bad that thing made us feel, as we slowly twisted the piece of twine around the stick. That's the sort of thing that I would only ever do with my therapist, mind you. Obviously, people were emotionally melting down before long. I wasn't comfortable doing the activity for obvious reasons, so I just sort of sat there awkwardly with the sticks and the string in my lap. I was the only one not doing it, and it was obvious, but because I wasn't doing it, I had the opportunity to watch Annie and the leader, and it was, well, pretty chilling. Annie was doing some weird pyramid thing above her head with her arms. There were a lot of references to her as being a lighthouse or some sort of a guiding figure throughout the meeting. She was the only one who wasn't doing the ritual other than the other leader. They were both running it apparently, and suddenly it occurred to me, as it probably has to all of you already, that Annie had been using this app just to bring people into their group. She was the only person who seemed to know everyone, yet no one there knew each other. Even the name of the group now made sense too. They weren't being specific, they were casting a wide net, I guess you could say. I had this big realization in a handful of seconds, and it made my stomach turn. So yeah, I was done at that point. But I couldn't get up because people were sharing their experiences and stuff, pouring their hearts out. This was the most messed up part though, in my opinion. There's no reason to do a releasing ceremony that forces people to feel their trauma like this, especially at the very first meeting. It's also inherently manipulative because it requires people to let their guard down. Then they can save the day by showing people how to release the very same pain that they just inflicted on themselves. But this isn't the fault of people there, so I didn't want to disrespect them or anything. Like, people were literally sobbing on top of my shoes that I had left by the door. I had to wait for the best time to ask someone to pass them to me, but finally I got up and told everyone that I had to go to the car, and I just took off. I texted Annie and told her that I wouldn't be back and that I hoped that she found her people. My advice to all of you guys, though, is to just make sure you're not her people. Be really careful of any spiritual ceremony or practice that demands vulnerability from you, especially directed by people who don't even know you beyond a name. It was a very creepy experience to be, well, a part of a cult like this for a moment. Like I said, it was extremely manipulative. It really didn't sit right with me, and I have a sneaking suspicion that whatever this is, it's not going to end well. Before my parents split up, we used to live in a mini mansion near a man-made lake. It had a massive garden and was surrounded by land with some water and lots of wild ducks. When my brother was still a toddler, before I was born, he fell into one of these lakes and nearly drowned. If it weren't for my uncle who saw him, he would have died for sure. When he got pulled out of the water, he was talking about some naked fish lady or something that was there staring at him. Everyone being shocked about what had just happened, They didn't bat an eyelid about this lady and just made sure that he was okay. Well, a few years later, when I was like 3 and my sister was around 11, she would occasionally complain to my parents about this lady who would visit her sometimes at night. She was always wet, naked, and something to do with being aquatic. She also mentioned that sometimes the husband showed up too, but was not very nice and she didn't really like him. When this woman wasn't visiting, she would be somewhere singing though. Every single night, my sister would talk about hearing singing, and the neighbors' kids would also mention it too. The parents thought that the kids were just trying to scare them, so they didn't really care, but it's this next part that really freaks me out. So fast forward to when I'm like about 12, we get into contact with the people who now own that house as we moved out a long time ago, and we never had mentioned this mermaid lady to them. But as we're leaving and saying our goodbyes, they start talking about this lady who sings and visits them at nighttime, who's always wet and sort of appears like a fish. We have never been able to figure this out, as there is just no way that they could have known about how we used to see things like that. It's the same house, just 10 to 15 years later, but that is startling to say the least. So, does anyone have any ideas as to what this could actually be? This happened when I was 7 years old. I know that memory can be tricky, but I have also thought about this experience pretty much every day since it happened. It's less important to me if this experience was real or not, and more important to me that whatever it was, it had a significant, long-lasting impact on my life. And the crazy thing is, it only lasted for a few seconds. So, it was the night before or early morning of January 25th, 1999. It was in Central California, and I only know the exact date because it was the only time it snowed here, in a really long time anyway. So you can still Google the newspaper articles about it. Anyway, basically what happened was, I woke up, sat up straight in bed, and crouching on the bed, one knee bent on the bed and one leg off the bed, was a typical grey alien. Large head, big black eyes. To me, the skin looked greenish grey and had an almost rubbery or just very smooth texture. No nose, slit for a mouth, no visible ears, and I remember it not wearing any clothing, it seemed. It just stared at me, and I just remember feeling sort of shocked, like not enough time to even feel terrified. That came the days, weeks, or months after. For whatever reason, I just sort of laid back down, turned on my side, put the covers over my head, and I guess I must have fallen asleep. Now, the whole next day, I was thankfully partially distracted by a rare snow day, but I also was very aware that I would not be able to go to sleep without feeling petrified for a very long time. I thought about telling my parents, but I just didn't have a word for, what I had seen. No reference for it. I didn't know what an alien or a grey was. For a lack of a better word, it was totally alien and just unknown to me. It wasn't until I was at my friend's house, whose dad was watching a sci-fi movie that had typical greys in it, that I learned to associate what I had seen with the word alien, and that they were at least real enough to be depicted on TV. And then, of course, that's when I started noticing them everywhere, in shows, movies, art, etc. I accept that this could have been a hallucination or a very vivid nightmare or whatever. Maybe I had seen them depicted on a TV before and my subconscious just picked up on it or something, but it is the single event that led to a lifelong obsession with aliens and unexplained phenomena. Sometimes I wonder if that was the whole point of that experience in the first place, or if that's a part of the reason why they appear to people, just so stories about them will continue to influence our culture, our mythos, and our spirituality. Whatever the case may be, I appreciate you guys hearing me out, and thanks for listening. So I had an unexplainable incident happen to me while hunting several years back. I was new to the area and drew my first antelope tag in an area known as the Red Desert, and I specifically scouted a remote location known as Bison Basin to hunt in. This area is probably one of the most remote areas in the lower 48, and also a great area for antelope hunting. But all that is really out there is some oil and gas production and uranium mining ops too. Long story short, I shot an antelope about 150 yards away from me and 200 yards from my truck. I walked out to where it dropped and filled out and attached my tag, and that's when I looked up and noticed off in the distance on the horizon a bright light moving quickly. It was hard to gauge the speed because it was probably a good 10 miles off in the distance. You can see for miles in all directions out here. One thing to note though is that time and distance intervals are important to this story. With antelope meat, it is important to get the animal cooled off as quickly as possible, or else the meat can taste kind of, well, funky, I guess you could say. So I was in a rush to get the animal dressed and back to my truck so that I could pack the body cavity with ice. That being said, I tagged the buck, looked up, and saw the light on the horizon thinking nothing of it, and I quickly went to work field dressing. In a matter of 30 to 45 seconds, I would say, I had opened up the body cavity and removed the guts, and that's when I glanced up and noticed about maybe a mile away, or perhaps even less, that the light that I had seen in the distance was approaching me with incredible speed. So in that 30 to 45 seconds, that light must have covered a distance of what I estimate to have been 9 miles, and it was approaching me at this speed too. I couldn't tell what I was looking at as the light was very bright and flying over the top of the sagebrush and making no sound. As the light got to within about 200 yards of me, I would say, after observing it for a few seconds, I could make out what it was. It was a rectangular shape of polished metal, about 5 feet tall by 2 to 3 feet wide, like a dressing mirror, and it was reflecting the setting sun which was behind me back at me. The flying object then dropped down below the sage, and I just couldn't see it anymore. Again, it made no sound, but it was close enough to me that I should have heard engine noise at least. Obviously, I was spooked and I was pretty shook. I wanted to get back to my truck and leave, but I had to take the animal. So I bent over and hid below the sagebrush line, and quickly finished field dressing and grabbed the leg, and I just took off running, dragging the antelope back towards my truck. This all took a matter of 1 to 1.5 minutes before I was completely gassed, so I stopped, looked back to see if the light was anywhere to be seen, and I could now see the light blasting off in the opposite direction. Again, back 8 to 9 miles, going towards the horizon, moving faster than anything could possibly travel over that terrain. It was still reflecting the setting sun back at me, and it eventually disappeared over the horizon after a couple of seconds, and I finished dragging the animal to the truck, and I just got the heck out of there. I don't know what I saw, but I know that it was not a drone, SXS, or any kind of low-flying plane. I definitely would have heard the engine noise being that close, and that terrain could not be covered at that speed by any kind of wheeled vehicle, that much is clear. I even went as far to ask Fish and Game and the uranium miners if they ever operated any kind of drones that could perform like that, and they said no, but I am 100% sure that that was no drone. I haven't been back to the area since, and I don't have any plans to do so. So my house is well known for being haunted, and there has been deaths, murders, etc. in my house, but tonight was definitely the straw that broke the camel's back. You see, my wife is frequently home alone because I work in the next town over, and my mother-in-law does home health. Tonight, She was just scrolling on Facebook when her phone started to go crazy, randomly opening apps, even after she closed everything out. And she said that a male voice came through her phone and said hello multiple times and echoed, but also sounded like it was right there. This is not the first time anything paranormal has happened in our house, but for this to keep happening when she is home by herself is quite frankly starting to tick me off. I've told whatever it is on multiple occasions that it's not welcome, nor is it allowed to attach to anybody in this house, including our animals, and to leave us all alone and leave our house. We have crystals in the house that give great energy and have really helped the energy of the house and the flow at that. But it just seems like the paranormal activity is starting to ramp up again, and I'm beyond over it, because last night we were watching TV and watched a white object fly past our window when our window is way too tall for any average person, especially in our area of old people. Plus, to fly by the window like that, especially from that angle which comes straight from a wall towards the street, it just makes no sense. I've woken up in the middle of the night and I saw a face hovering next to the TV that swooped down towards me but stopped about 3 feet from me and vanished into thin air. We have heard footsteps, seen a child with razor-sharp teeth in the back room twice. It's always been the same child back there, and for a little bit of history, the mayor of our town at one point was beat to death in the driveway here. A college student OD'd in one of the bedrooms. Multiple family members have passed away in the house from natural causes, and a man and his wife had an argument because he was cheating here. He got drunk, she apparently killed him, and he walked through the house leaving blood that was still in the house when my wife and her family moved in. He apparently bled out and died in the front porch in a folding chair. And while none of the three, between the mayor, the college student, and the man who was stabbed by his wife, have ever been violent or even scary, whatever this thing is that is continuing to mess with my wife, I want it gone and I don't know what to do. Which is why I'm here. Can anyone tell me what this might be, and how to possibly get rid of it and banish it out of our house? I don't want my family to live in fear, and I don't want to have to worry every time that I leave the house too. I'm worried that something crazy is going to happen when I'm not there, and there's going to be nothing that I can do about it. So, any and all help is very much appreciated, and a huge thank you in advance. I work in a care home in the UK, and I work nights. I used to work evenings, but it all started with just footsteps behind me, particularly when I was on my own. Then they started scratching my head and tapping it. I then changed to night shifts, and certain things started popping up that all night staff have seen. Like one night, maybe about a year ago, I was walking down a staircase, and to my right is a corridor that leads to a dead end. I looked down the corridor and I saw a figure. She was almost glowing, and she was so white that she had no face and very straggly hair. She was peeping out of a doorway of a bathroom. I could only see her head and upper body. Although she had no face, it felt like she was watching me, so I turned to call out for my coworker, but when I glanced back, she was gone. She doesn't bother me too much. She seems nice, I guess, and I've never worried about seeing her again, and I haven't. Another spirit is what staff call the Shadow Man. He lurks behind and in corners, and he only gets very close to one staff member who I regularly work with. I've only seen him in one of the front entrances, and I froze, and so did he. One night, though, me and this one coworker were doing the cleaning in the corridor with all the living rooms. We were standing there having a rant about general stuff that was annoying us, I guess, but for context, the spirits never like us being negative, it seems. And as we were ranting, all the living rooms started making really loud noises, all at once. I felt brave and told them to shut up. I turned away from the noise, and this one coworker told me the Shadow Man was directly behind me. I didn't look, so I don't know if he was, but the noise quieted down because we'd stopped our discussion, but when we started up again, it started as well. Other sort of things happened too, where we would be hearing a man shout "help me" with no man around as we were in a corridor filled with ladies who were asleep. Another time would be when I was walking out of the kitchen and all of the cutlery started banging around. I run really quickly and refuse to be in that kitchen once it's dark outside. Another is the people we see sat in the chairs in our peripheral vision, but when we look, nobody's ever there. Then there's the whistling that happens so close to us, but we have to pretend not to hear it because it just feels really wrong. Another time is that I sat in the staff room on my own and something said my name in my ear, but I ignored it. Then when I'm in the laundry room, I can hear things in the corridor like walking frames, even when everybody is asleep. Another time, there was screaming upstairs and we couldn't find the source of it anywhere. It was like when we went to one end of the corridor, it screamed on the opposite side, and then we'd be going back and forth without finding the person screaming. On another shift, we sat in the staff room at around 5 a.m. and there was a walking stick sound in the corridor. We went out to see if anybody was there and awake, but they weren't. Another night, me and another co-worker are doing normal resident assistance, and we're both working with one person. I suddenly start hearing banging noises, but my other co-worker couldn't hear it. At first I ignored it, after my co-worker said that she didn't hear anything, and summed it up to an overactive imagination. It then began getting louder though, and I turned to my co-worker and said someone must be breaking in or something. She told me to look out of the front window as there's a view to the main entrance there, but nobody was there. Again, I tried to ignore it. When we left this particular room, we decided to go up to the corridor, and then we passed the bathroom that I previously said that I saw a peeping woman from. The door was closed this night. Suddenly, the door starts banging really loudly and shaking. At that, we both ran back down the corridor as we were both scared. All alarms were on doors, so we knew that no residents were awake. And quite honestly, I still have no idea what is actually in that bathroom. Another night, I was on shift again walking down that same corridor with a staff member. We had done our hourly checks on all residents and suddenly start hearing on a loop, help me," over and over again in a woman's voice. At first we think it's a resident and instantly start checking rooms frantically, but nobody is awake. We can still hear the "help me" though. It was after checking rooms that we listened closely and neither of us actually recognized the voice. We didn't leave each other's side all night that night because it was pretty terrifying. Now, I left the care home temporarily about 3 months ago and I can go back at any point, but genuinely it is a terrifying place. I'm not very good at telling stories, and I'm sorry if this is a bit of a ramble of all things weird and creepy, but I've always wondered what is in the home and how aware they are of their surroundings. I don't like that they know my name, and they also seem to target night staff. That's a bit creepy, and I just really, really hope that nothing ever follows me home. I live in PNW in a fairly populated but still mountain town. I specifically live on 425 feet of riverfront. So last night at around 9:30 p.m, myself and my partner started hearing an initially distant, indistinguishable voice screaming in a state of panic and distress. We live near a popular trailhead, and a few times over the years, people have somehow wandered down our road late at night, sometimes a little bit tipsy and sometimes in small groups, sometimes transient. So, when we started to hear an erratic voice, we got up, started initially checking the parameters of our house and the road, but there was absolutely nobody out there. However, over the course of the next couple of minutes, the voice got louder and louder and obviously closer, and it was screaming at the top of its lungs for help. I say help in parentheses because it was a little difficult to make out, but it sounded like a not fully enunciated help. Whatever it was clearly in extra distress, screaming for its life distress, yelling help. We could only make out help like help with a soft P, if that makes sense, but the words sounded the exact same every time. There was no variance or other sounds, just the word help, back to back in the most distressed voice that I've ever heard. With how quickly the screams were approaching and a weird echo to them as well, we quickly realized whatever was screaming for help was actually in the river. It was actively being pulled down the river current. Our river is wide, fast-moving and dangerous this time of year. There was no other way for a voice to be approaching so rapidly and from the location that it was, unless it were in the river. We see and hear a lot of kayakers and know how their voices travel down there as well. So over the course of about 3 minutes, we hear what was a distant cry for help, work up to the point that it's so loud that it sounded a few feet away, then slowly softer until we can no longer hear the screaming. Again, this sounds like a deep middle-aged man's voice, and the screams are maybe about 2 to 3 seconds apart, just back to back. At first, we tried to convince ourselves that it was an animal. We do see a lot of wildlife here after all. A herd of elk practically lives on our property, and we see bears and wildcats too. We initially thought maybe a young elk fell in the river, but no. We googled just about every animal distress call, scream, fight sounds, etc., anything really, and nothing even came close. I've always heard that coyotes can scream like people, but it was definitely not an older man. I've heard bears can yelp deep, however, they have absolutely no definition to their calls, and elk are way more high-pitched, and same for all local wildcats. Even the birds of prey and ravens that can mimic sounds cannot sound like this voice did. Initially, I called the non-emergency line because I wanted to convince myself that it was an animal. However, they quickly patched me over to 911 and said that I was apparently the third call for the same thing. So apparently the voice was strange and concerning enough that my even more wilderness-raised and savvy neighbors, they were concerned, and the police department took it very seriously. Then, the more that I thought about it, I started to think that if I was in a freezing river fighting for my life screaming for help, I might not yell as clearly as possible due to the pure state of panic, distress, and attempt to stay afloat. The more I thought about it, the more I was sure that it was a person though. 911 sent out 2 police officers. They were extremely nice and they took the call very seriously, but with just 2 of them, all they had were flashlights and a chainsaw, and they kinda just walked down to a few spots at the river and peeked around a bit. When our city has a genuine suspicion of a person in the river or a lost hiker, they send search and rescue and the helicopter, but they didn't do this night. I told my partner that I wouldn't be surprised if the next morning when it's daylight, somebody finds a body at that river spot. But it's getting later in the morning and I've kept my eye on the police scanner and the local media as well, and I just haven't seen anything. Now I'm back to really hoping that it was just a wild animal, but tell me, does anyone know of a wild animal that could sound like that? What are the chances if this was a human man that he pulled himself out somewhere down the line and got some help, or do we think that it's just a matter of time until someone reports him missing or we find a body down the river? Also, just a minor update is that within the last 15 minutes, a helicopter has begun tracing up and down the river and circling at an area a ways past my house. So I'm feeling a little bit discouraged that it likely was actually a human. That being said, I haven't seen anything on any social media, and usually my local police post updates about stuff like this, if it was a human, very quickly. Also, the locals usually buzz about things like this on social media, and I haven't seen anything posted yet. I'm not sure what's going on at the moment, but this whole situation is, well, pretty creepy to say the least. I live alone with a 7-month-old, non-walking child. Things have been getting, well, progressively weirder too the longer that I stay here. To start, believe me or not, I have a history of seeing ghosts. In my first week here, I saw a little girl peek her head into my doorway in my bedroom. Now, if you don't believe that, I'll give you some more, but things have been randomly disappearing out of my home, like little things, baby toys, earrings, etc. At first, I just wrote it off as me misplacing things. Easy enough. Then today, things spiked big time. A lot of things I'd been missing completely out of nowhere just sort of appeared on the floor of my living room, like right in the middle of the floor. Tonight, I come home from a day out with my boyfriend and I noticed my lights were off. With a weird encounter the night before, or someone knocking on my door last night, I called a friend and had him walk me through the house to be sure, because I leave my lights on all the time. I'm terrified of the dark, so I just leave the lights on at all times. The apartment is clear and the door was locked when I entered though, and after a couple of hours I go to the bathroom and I realize that my phone has been recording audio on a social media app for over 10 minutes while I was staring right at it, even using it in fact. I listen back to the audio and you can hear me texting and using the phone when on Snapchat. You sort of have to press and hold the audio record button to send a voice message. Then when I go to wash my hands, my bathroom sink is covered in black soot. I don't work a dirty job and I have zero idea of where all that black soot came from, as I haven't washed anything like that off of me anytime recently and I'm kind of obsessive about keeping my sink clean. And I mean, it's all up and down my sink and the backsplash and just everywhere. Then, my daughter starts screaming like I've hardly heard her scream that bad. So I go make her a bottle and when I go into the kitchen, the only burner with something on it was on high heat. My stove has buttons instead of knobs, so this is extremely unlikely to have been an accident. Over the last couple of days, the stove's timer has been randomly going off and it sounds like an old apartment buzzer, so it's really loud and it always scares the life out of me too. So, I'm wondering what I can do about this. I'm a terrified single mother and my apartment doesn't have any smoke alarms, it's very old, and I'm actually pretty scared about what might happen here. Any advice is appreciated as I try to figure out what the heck is going on here. I've recently moved back to my hometown of McLaren Vale in South Australia, after a decade away. I still think back to this particular night too, as I still struggle to comprehend what we saw, as does my childhood mate. So, in November of 2011, I drove to pick up my friend for a sleepover. I had just recently gotten my P-plates and we reveled in the newfound freedom. At approximately 8 p.m, we were driving back toward McLaren Vale of Main South Road, turning left, and just as we started along the road near CPB compound, I stopped dead in the middle of the road. I couldn't believe my eyes, in fact. My friend was typing away on her iPhone and I stuttered, "Mate, what is that?" She didn't look up and I hit her in a panic with my arm, and annoyed, she broke her concentration and looked up to human me. She went pale. Her little voice squeaked, only managing a whisper through her fear. "Dude, what is that?" There, crouched down about 10 feet in front of my hatchback, was a pale, thin thing. "Is that a kangaroo that's been hit?" I tried to reason. No, definitely not. It was tall, at least 6 foot, along being bent up. This thing was hunched over, thin arms and legs, a torso like a human. Its skin pale, near blue-grey, translucent almost. Its bones were completely visible through its paper-thin flesh. We could see every single rib, in fact. Its head was bare except for its black eyes, void black. They didn't reflect any light from the car headlights, too. No nose, just 2 holes, no lips but a wide gaping mouth, and when it opened to hiss or snarl, about 50 to 100 ape-like sharp teeth seemed to point out from its mouth, pointed like daggers. Its hands were sort of human, long, almost black on the ends of its fingers. Human feet, but absolute talons where the toes should have been. Being two teenage girls, we were absolutely terrified, frozen still in our tracks. My hands gripped the steering wheel, unsure whether to go forward or back. My friend began to panic. This thing, though, just stared us down, growling, opening and closing its mouth over and over, almost like it was warning us not to do anything stupid. We must have sat there locked eyes with this thing for at least 2 minutes. It then stepped to the left of us. I decided to slowly crawl to the right and move around it. My friend almost jumped into my lap as I tried to calm her down while steering the car around this thing. It bared its teeth as we inched closer. It looked into the car as we came up right beside it, and it looked absolutely rageful, like it hated us. It slowly crawled on all fours like a human would toward the bush, and we watched it as it disappeared just into the darkness, and we didn't see it again. We sped home as fast as we could in my little car, and when we got home, my parents didn't believe us, obviously, despite how terrified we were. They assumed that we must have been smoking or something and just saw something else. But I brought this up with my friend during lockdowns during 2021. I think I had compartmentalized it as a dream to cope or something, but she instantly reiterated word for word what we both saw. I've been trying to find other stories from people regarding sightings. In 2021, I posted on a paranormal forum, but I can't find it anywhere. However, I did get a few people respond, saying one guy had seen something similar in McLaren Vale, the same location as our encounter, and another lady said that she had been stalked in a public toilet, mocked the voice of her mother apparently, by something she believes to have been a skinwalker in Renmark. Obviously, I cannot confirm these things, but if anyone has had any similar encounters or you know something about what it could have been, please do reach out to me because I would genuinely love to know after all these years. This happened just a few nights ago. I waited a few more nights before I decided to post this as well, to see if this was some just reoccurring, explainable thing. It hasn't happened since then though, so I feel it's appropriate to share this now. So my fiancé and I were going to bed at around 10 or 11 p.m. Our bedroom is in the basement and our roommate lives upstairs. His schedule is the opposite of ours pretty much, so we have become accustomed to him sort of knocking on our door later in the night if he needs anything. The fiancé and I were having our final conversation before drifting off, and we hear a familiar knock at the door. "Come in," I say, because we're all pretty close and he knows he's welcome. No one steps through the door though, and I say again, "Come in." Still nothing. So we call his name, and when he doesn't come in the door, I get up and open it. And there was no one there. I sat and we joked briefly about how it's the ghost. Long story short is that we've had some other weird experiences, as people often do with an old house, but nothing as weird as what happened this night. And so in the end, we just go to bed. Fiancé falls asleep and I start to drift off too. As I'm falling asleep, there's another knock. This doesn't wake fiancé up, so I don't say anything and instead just get up and decide to investigate the basement a little bit. Maybe the cat is just being a brat or something is settling, who knows. I note that the knocking sounded similar in tempo to the first time that it happened, so I wondered if it was some pipes in the walls adjusting to the winter temperatures. I figure, yeah, it must just be that. But I couldn't help the feeling that the noise just was very obviously knocking against our door. What I mean is that we're very used to the sound as our own roommate very often approaches us that way. I also know what creaking pipes sound like and, well, this just was not that. Nor had the pipes ever adjusted that way in previous winters. Well, whatever in the end. It's annoying, but no big deal, right? I go back to bed and actually fall asleep this time. About 30 minutes later, the knocking starts again though. It could be something settling in the house, but it so obviously sounds like knuckles on the wood of our door. The pattern, the tempo, and the hollow sound of our door. And it is happening at our door. It's not the walls or the ceiling. We have our laundry room, a room away from our bedroom, but our door is so thick that we never hear anything happening out there. And because of this, it is decidedly weird, but I'm tired and I have to work in the morning too, so I try my best to ignore it. But every 30 minutes to an hour, the knocking comes back, and with each occurrence, the knock pattern changes, deliberately too. There's fast knocking, slow knocking. There was even a shave and a haircut sort of knock. Each time I'm trying to ignore it and pull back asleep, only to be jostled awake again. I had lost track of time, but I assumed that it was early morning when I was shot awake by a knock followed by a male voice saying, "Hey." Okay, so this had to have been our roommate. I got up and once again opened the door, quickly this time, to find no one. Well, maybe he was messing with us. He does have a weird sense of humor. I begrudgingly put on some clothes to go walk around upstairs and find him. Turns out, he was still at work. The house is pitch black, and at that, I'm starting to freak out. I go to the front door and see if someone was knocking there, and there's no one there either. Of course, if there was someone trying to get in all night, the dog would have been freaking the heck out, but I really had just no other explanation. So I make myself go back to bed. Maybe the pipes are not only shifting to sound like knocking on wood, but also creaking to sound like a man calling out. The night goes on, and though the knocking continues, I finally get used to it and I actually get a few hours sleep. Until around 7 a.m. when my fiancé and I leap out of bed to another obvious hey from outside the room. One last time I open the door and we find no one. I confirm that yes, she woke up because of the hay as well, and I explain to her that I've been dealing with the knocking all night. Roommate doesn't come home until later in the day, and I ask him if he tried to talk to us the previous night. He confirms though that he never came home and stayed at a friend's house. I tell him what happened, and he's as stumped as we are. Like I said, I waited the following nights to see if there would be any more weird house sounds, and even as things have warmed up and cooled down again, there have been no more weird noises to suggest pipes or other household sounds. In general, we're fans of paranormal activity stuff, but I always err on the side of skepticism. This was probably the weirdest thing to ever happen to us at this house, and I still don't know what it could have been if not some genuine high strangeness. So I was going about my usual hunting trip, turkey shooting. I had a stand set up in a good spot where the turkeys went to rest during the night. I sat posted there for like several hours, I think, only breaking focus to relieve myself or eat. Night comes and I eventually hear noises coming from a small meadow area where the turkeys are usually found. I should probably mention here that I use a bow during night hunting as I find it more peaceful and more productive. Anyway, I made aim and was about to release, but suddenly something in the back of my head told me to put down my bow and stay still. A feeling of just what I can only describe as pure fear and adrenaline hit me, and I really didn't know why. I mean, it was just a turkey, right? Well, hours pass and it's finally 7 a.m., light out. I get down, get to my truck, and peel out of there like my life depended on it. Well, a few days later, a news report comes out on my local paper that a man had been kidnapped, violated, and killed a 20-year-old hiker in those very woods at the same day that I was there, not even 30 minutes after I left. When I was 17, I started working for a racehorse trainer and I decided to try and cycle to my new job. Working with horses meant early starts, so my bike ride was in the dark because it was late winter, around January I think. It was 29 years ago in fact, so hard to remember, but the road that I had to cycle on ran partially along the coastline in a series of sweeping S-bends. On one side was cliff face, with no way to get off the road for about a mile. On the other, railings and a steep drop down to the sea. Now, as I'm cycling, I noticed someone walking ahead on the road in my bike light. They had their back to the traffic, which was just me at the time, and were wearing jeans, a dark mauve bomber jacket, and a backpack as well. Now, I want to emphasize here that this was slightly uphill and I was cycling really slowly, so I had a lot of time to take all this in. I remember thinking that they were walking on the wrong side of the road, but also that if they walked the other side, it wasn't much safer, I guess. I remember watching them walking steadily in front of me, and as I got closer, I was trying to breathe slowly so I didn't sound so unfit and embarrass myself. It wasn't so unusual to see people walking like this, because the area at the time was very rural and there was no bus in town until you get into like the main village, which was the direction that we were headed, so I figured that they were walking to catch a bus for work or whatever. But before I drew up beside him, I pulled away a little to give him some room, then called out morning, so I didn't startle the guy. And as I did though, I suddenly realized that he just wasn't there. What I mean too is that he didn't fade away or anything like that. He just wasn't there anymore. The reason that it scared me so much at the time too is that I had spent probably 3 or 4 minutes coming up behind this guy who walked very normally and honestly looked very solid. And then all of a sudden he was just gone. I have other stories, but they're more noises and feelings, that kind of thing. But this is the one thing that I will always hand on heart insist was a real ghost encounter, and not something explained away easily by anyone. Also, after this, I managed to secure a ride with another employee, so I never had to cycle that road again. My mum, stepdad and I have lived in our house for around 15 years. I'm 21. Mum says that I've had a presence attached to me since I was a baby, and honestly, that does track, because there is a very obvious presence attached to me, even still in our house, that just sort of lurks in my room. None of that really bothers me too much, nor do the noises, things we've seen in the corner of our eyes, stuff that's moved, or eerie feelings that we've gotten in our time there. But this morning, something new and a whole different level of terrifying happened. My mum left for work at 5:30. I heard her pull out of the driveway. Then at 6, the garbage man came and my dog freaked out. He was in the living room and I was laying in bed, down the hall, waiting for him to just calm down a bit. Then I heard a woman say his name very clearly, loudly and concisely. He kept barking and I perked up at this, thinking that either my mum was still home or I was hearing things. I just brushed it off when I then heard her again. She said, "Be quiet," and sure enough, my dog stopped barking. I texted my mum to make sure that she wasn't actually home, and she told me that she had been gone for 30 minutes as I expected. So I went through the house and nobody was there. It could not have been anyone else either. I mean, nobody would have just shown up at 6 a.m., scolded my dog and then left. Mum asked what happened and I told her, and she told me that a week ago she was asleep in her room when she heard a woman loudly say "oh" right beside her ear and she bolted up. She said that she was sure that she heard it, but had felt like she was going crazy, until I told her what I heard this morning. We described it to each other, and it's the same, a mature woman's voice. It cannot be a squatter, or at least we're pretty sure it's not. We have a crawl space that is impossible to access without knocking a bunch of stuff off the shelf in front of it, and an attic that is also impossible to access without opening an extremely loud and heavy door. What I'm wondering, though, is why this entity, or whatever it is, has decided to all of a sudden become vocal in a way that we've never seen or heard here before, when we've been here for over a decade now. Any insight would be much appreciated because, quite honestly, this is really terrifying. The house that I grew up in, the same one that my parents and one of my brothers live in to this day, is very active with, well, what we call benevolent spirits. For some quick context, I grew up sharing a house with two female spirits. I felt their energy, I guess you could say, had encounters, and I still notice them lingering around when I go to visit my parents to this day. One of the most intense encounters happened back in 2007, though. I was 13, my brother was 12, and the twins were 7 at this point. It was a humid day from memory, with thunderstorm warnings and dark skies. I remember it being late summer, and the whole week prior was thunderstorm after thunderstorm. The storms, they knocked the power out eventually, leaving the house dimly lit by candles and flashlights. My parents, they were in the garage, trying to get our generator to start, so that my mum could at least have a cup of tea by boiling water in the kettle. Us kids, of course, wanted to be able to charge our Nintendo DS's, since that was our obsession like many kids growing up in the mid-2000s. Anyway, I was sitting in the basement with my brothers. We were all sitting on the sectional, waiting for the power to come back on. Our DS's were all drained of power, and we were unsure of what to do. My brother Chad, he mentioned to me that he wanted to grab something from up in our bedroom that we shared, but didn't want to go up alone. I knew that he was afraid of the dark, so I didn't bother to question him anymore. We climbed the stairs from the basement, walked through the tiled hallway that connects to the kitchen, and then turned left to face the stairs going to the second floor. It was only 10 or so steps, not a very steep or strenuous climb to make by any means. There was just pitch black in front of us, but suddenly a deep, foreboding feeling just ran right through me. I always felt in tune with my intuitions, and I try my best to listen to them. But this time, things just suddenly happened before I could do anything else. With our flashlight still pointing up the stairs, lightning flashed and illuminated the hallway. Now, if you're standing where my brother and I were, you would see a hallway at the top of the stairs, which only went about 12 feet or so forward until you would run into the door to a linen closet. And, standing in front of that linen closet at the end of the hallway, suddenly there was just a woman. The brightness of the lightning almost hurt my eyes, yet I could still make out this woman standing upstairs. She was wearing a long skirt and a button-up shirt. I couldn't place an exact time period to the clothes, and I still can't to this day. I just know that it was from years, even decades prior to 2007. This figure was not facing us. She was sort of staring off to the left of the hall, towards my other brother's room. I can remember this intense feeling of fear suddenly. Now I think it was because we had no idea an apparition of a woman would appear before us, not because this spirit was evil or anything. But after what felt like a minute, Chad and I bolted towards the living room, hopping onto the couch, and we just sat there, wide-eyed and probably staring into nothing, trying to piece together what we just saw. Luckily, nothing paranormal or strange happened for the rest of that evening. We just went back downstairs, played our Nintendo Wii, hoping to forget what we saw as the generator came back on. But I remember wondering who that apparition exactly was. She was much younger than the other lady, who we named Tara, and from then on, I realized that it wasn't just Tara in our home. This woman would make more appearances in the future, and I guess, luckily for us, she would be friendly for the most part in those situations. So this happened at two instances, one on February 5th, 6:30 in the morning, and today at 6:16 a.m. So I'll start the first time that it actually happened. I went to the laundry room to put on a load of washing, and only the lights were on in the laundry room, and the light in my room, which illuminated a bit of the hallway, was there as well. So when I was finished with my laundry, I then heard footsteps, and I looked around the corner and saw a dark figure running at me with heavy footsteps. I automatically assumed that it was my brother, so I yelled his name. Then the figure took a sudden right to the living room. A bit confused because he would usually answer, I turned on the light to the living room, and to my shock, there was absolutely no one there. I went to my brother's room and asked him if he left his room, which he replied, no, I haven't. So obviously that sent a shiver down my spine. Today, at around 6:15, still in my bed, I opened my eyes and I saw my younger brother standing next to my closet holding his tablet, not facing towards me, just whole body was pointing at my closet. I thought that was a bit weird because, my door was closed, so I closed my eyes to try to fall back asleep. Then I decided suddenly to open my eyes again, and I see him much closer, like standing on the side of my bed from me and still in the same position, just way closer. I tried to say something, but all of a sudden I felt like I just couldn't speak. I fought with that for a bit, and then eventually I said, talk. Multiple times I said this, then all of a sudden, whoever was there just up and vanished. I got up, unable to believe what I had just seen, went to my younger brother's room, and there he was, fast asleep in his bed. That again sent shivers down my spine. I've thought about it, and maybe it was sleep paralysis or something. I'm not sure though, because I was still able to move, and I was wide awake. And I know what sleep paralysis feels like, and it really didn't feel like that. In any case, I have no idea what to do about all of this, so if you've got any advice for me, then please do let me know. This all started when I was around the age of 14. My younger brother and I decided to swap rooms at one stage, and from the first night that I slept in my new room, weird things started happening. I usually sleep through the night, but I started abruptly waking up at exactly 2:17 a.m. on the dot every single night. Each time I would wake up, I always felt that sixth sense that something or someone was watching me from the right corner of my bedroom, always. I've felt good energy from, spirits or whatever you want to call them before, when family members have passed, but this was something different. It seemed invasive, intimidating, and I was freaked out that whatever this was could see me, but I couldn't see it. What's weird too was when I slept at my mum's house, I never woke up at 2:17, only at my dad's house. Then small occurrences started to happen too. I was staying at my mum's when my dad informed me my alarm clock radio turned on by itself in the middle of the night at full volume and woke the whole family up. I hadn't been to his house in days, and when I was home again, my little brother and we would play in the driveway. He had to go to the bathroom at one point, so he went back in the house, but all of a sudden a tennis ball came flying out of the garage. That made absolutely no sense because he was nowhere near the garage. One night I heard paper shuffling on my desk. even though the window was closed. A different morning, I watched my dad's sunglasses on the kitchen counter move several inches by themselves when I was the only one awake. My older sibling, he began to believe me when random lights would come on by themselves in the house too. What's strange too is that we caught onto the pattern that the paranormal activity would happen mostly when my little brother wasn't home. Fast forward to when the house was empty, since my parents were on vacation. My grandma would check in on the house with my siblings, and each time they'd go back, a new light would be on. The last night before my parents came back from vacation, she triple-checked all the lights were off. My parents were definitely surprised when they arrived home to find every light on in the house. My grandma swore that our house was actually cursed and refused to visit anymore. My stepmom then began to believe my paranormal stories too. My older brother and I heard footsteps running up and down the stairs together one night when my younger brother was at a sleepover. It really freaked us out, and at one point, it even got sort of dangerous because the gas stove burners had been turned on by themselves on low heat overnight. If any of this had been a prank previously, I can guarantee that no one in our family would mess around like that, putting our lives in danger. My dad finally began to believe me too about maybe 8 months into this haunting when all of the kids weren't home one night, and he apparently heard whispering in the hallway. He freaked out, grabbed his knife thinking that there was a robber. When he opened the door, he found my TV had turned on by itself and people were talking on the TV with low volume. The last thing to ever happen was one night I came out of the shower and I went to change into my room. The mirror was foggy from the steam. My older brother knocked on my door and asked what I wrote on the mirror. Confused, I went in to look, and we both sat there in awe as letters began to actually show up in front of us slowly. The whole family quickly gathered around to decipher it, and it said, "I am watching," and then there was a word that we couldn't quite figure out. Our family didn't know how to justify what we saw, and after that day, the occurrences just all of a sudden stopped. I stopped waking up every night. There were no footsteps, nothing. A year later, my dad called me and said that he found something really weird on my brother's birth certificate. He asked, "Didn't you used to say that Nick, our younger brother, was somehow connected to, like, the haunted stuff that happened in the house or whatever?" After confirming, he casually mentioned that my younger brother was born at exactly 2:17 a.m. I was pretty much speechless. I mean, there was no way that this was a coincidence. From that day on, I have had so many more questions than answers too. 2 years ago, I had a psychic medium meeting, and after sharing my story, she said how the entity targeted me because I acknowledged it. It was no longer in the house. She confidently said that an entity like that is attached to an object or a person that has since left the house, which means that I definitely think that something was, or maybe is, attached to my younger brother. So, a few weeks back, I shared a story about potentially being watched by someone that was lurking outside of my house. I don't know if you guys remember it, but the TLDR is that I saw someone walking around outside of our house, sort of down the side of our house, with burglar lights coming on next to the free library that my parents had set up just outside of our house. So, to cut a long story short, there hasn't been any activity since that night. But I was on a phone call the very next night with a friend when I noticed someone standing outside, completely shrouded in darkness. I proceeded to talk loudly about how some creep was watching me, and they'd better watch out. Stupid, yes, I know, but it seemed to work because all was pretty much quiet after that. Or so I thought. You see, tonight was one of my oldest friends' last nights in town, so I was out till about 9:30, drove 2 friends home and then myself. Since it was so early, I wasn't that worried, but still alert. I drove up the side of the street that he hit on last time, even though it was out of my way, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I noticed one of the new houses that's being built had its lights on, which I didn't think much of at that moment. Fast forward an hour though, and I start hearing a weird, sort of loud banging sound across the way. I know that it's risky, but I'm not letting a horrible person dictate my comfort. And I've also been watching for activity or pretending, so I can maybe catch them. I've also kept my window open as usual, hence why it was dumb to razz him up the other night by talking about someone watching me, but I digress. Whatever it was, it stopped, so I wrote it off, which was in the end a very big mistake. Because shortly after, I started hearing banging again, but this time I could actually feel it. It was coming from my house. I genuinely freaked out, like Knives Out status, but much more cowardly, cowering on my bedroom floor with my ear pressed to the door and knife in hand. It was a strange hollow sound that didn't seem like the front door, and in the end it wasn't. I once again called 911, describing what was happening and thinking that they probably are going to write it off because I sort of sounded crazy. I still feel in shock because, this only just happened, but thankfully the kind dude on the line definitely took me seriously and said someone would be on their way. For the record too, the police department is like a 3-minute drive from my house. I ended up tiptoeing downstairs to see and once again felt my heart stop. I went to the front window, ducked down, and there wasn't anyone at the front door. Then the banging starts up again, and I can tell how close it is now. I go to the side window that overlooks the garage, and that was when I saw him, dressed in black, hood pulled far over his face, banging wildly on the garage door with a crowbar. I honestly don't know why he wasn't using the crowbar to break in or whatever, but I'm super glad that he didn't, as the door inside the garage that leads into the house, it's always left unlocked. To say that I panicked is honestly a vast understatement. I nearly wet myself, which is understandable, right? I'm just standing there, peeking out of the window, watching this guy wail on my garage door with a crowbar, thinking how unhinged he must be and how much I want the cops to get here now, when, just like before, suddenly he just runs off. I quite literally just got done giving a report to the cops that showed up. My family was woken up and had to talk to them as well, as they're the homeowners, and now they're both so freaked out that my dad just ordered 4 exterior cameras to monitor the house. I really don't think it's over yet, too. This man has some reason that he's targeting my house, possibly me, who knows, since he started out by watching outside of my window. But whatever the case, we are definitely thinking about security now and exactly what steps we need to take next. So, I'm coming here for some advice because I feel some sort of dreadful presence in my house, specifically in my kitchen and living room, but they aren't separated. I'm 20 and I live with just my mum. I don't really know where to start, but I've had multiple different physical things happen in my kitchen while I'm home. Let me also say, though, that I moved into this house not even a full 2 years ago, and I've never had previous encounters with anything paranormal. I guess I'll just run down the list of encounters, starting with the first one and leading up to the most recent. So, the first instance was maybe about 2 or 3 months after I moved in. My mum, whose bedroom is on the first floor, said that she woke up at about 3 a.m. to wind chimes making noise in our kitchen. She walked out there and actually also saw them moving. My mum loves wind chimes, and before this she always had some inside, but we took them down after this because there was no wind. The second instance was, this was the first event I actually saw with my own eyes. Last winter, maybe around November of 2022, I was sitting with my ex-girlfriend on the couch watching TV in the living room. We had been there for maybe 35 to 45 minutes when, out of nowhere, my lunchbox flies off of the top of the refrigerator and lands on the floor about 5 feet in front of it. I paused the show and was absolutely freaked out since the only people home at that time were me and her, so I picked it up and put it back on top of the fridge. My ex was already freaked out, so we both just went upstairs. I'm not sure if this is important or not too, but afterwards I told my sister, who is well versed with pagan witchcraft practices, to read tarot cards regarding this situation. A few times she pulled cards with cats playing on them. She told me the spirit is likely a dead pet that wants someone to play with. She also did some sort of a sage ritual at this time as well. Again, I don't know if it's helpful or not, or if it's related or whatever, but I just thought that I should throw that in. Now, the third incident, and this happened 2 days ago, and this was the second thing I actually saw with my own eyes. I have a home gym, and sometimes I'll work out after work, and 2 days ago I was home alone, just working out in the basement, and when I finished, I walked upstairs to the kitchen to make my protein drink and eat some strawberries. There was the creepy feeling as always in that room, but I try to ignore it. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing off strawberries and eating them, and I looked up out of the window that's behind the sink. It was completely dark in my backyard at this point, and I couldn't see anything but the reflection of the room behind me. When I looked up, I saw what appeared to be a blurry black figure moving very quickly from one side of the living room behind me to the other. I couldn't make out any features because I only saw it for about a half a second, and I don't even know if it had any at all, to be honest. And when I say fast, I mean this thing was fast, like the same speed of a human full sprinting from like one side of my living room to another. I instantly turned around, but there was absolutely nothing there. I was freaking out though, and I started saying stuff like, "Whatever you are, you're not welcome here and you need to leave. This is my house, I live here, and I don't want you here. You need to go." Then I walked upstairs and laid in my bed until my mum got home, because I don't get this eerie or creepy feeling when there's somebody else home. Eventually I showered and I went to bed. The fourth instance, after instance 3, I debated not saying anything to my mum because, well, I don't want to freak her out since she sleeps on the first floor. But last night I decided that I'd tell her, and she was understandably a little bit freaked out by it. This morning my mum calls me while I'm at work and tells me that she herself was withholding experiences from me too because she also didn't want to freak me out. Now, my mum runs a small business out of the part of the basement located directly underneath the kitchen and living room, and she told me that she has at least a dozen times heard footsteps in the kitchen above her walking around when she is sure that she is the only one home. Apparently, this is why she plays her music so loud when she's down there. From my phone call with her this morning, I learned she got into contact with some people from her church, and soon she'll be having someone who specializes in spirits or whatever to come and take a look. Now, the fifth and final instance, I'm not entirely sure if this was just in my head or an actual encounter because, I was actually on something that day. Not my first time, so I know how to function, but about a month ago, I decided to trip in my house with my current girlfriend and 2 other friends. For the majority of the trip, we stayed upstairs watching some TV shows. The Midnight Gospel on Netflix, highly recommend by the way. And I had to go downstairs to take a pee, so I went down by myself, and I swear that while I was coming down the stairs, I saw what looked to be a woman's face smiling in a really unsettling way at me from the couch. I had some laundry on the couch and I saw the face vividly in the laundry. This really disturbed me too, and I just sprinted to the bathroom to take a pee, and then I sprinted back upstairs for the rest of the night. I would also like to add that in the mornings before work, 5:45 a.m., still very dark outside, and at night time, when I'm in the kitchen by myself, I feel an uncomfortable sensation, almost like the feeling you get when somebody is watching you. Of course, every time I look around, I'm alone, but I just feel this sense of intense dread. My house is also silent, and rarely ever do I hear any noise from outside, since my house is surrounded on 3 sides with trees. All of these accounts, though, they are honest, and I believe that I described what I've seen and my experiences to the best of my ability. I would really appreciate any advice that people can give me on how to get rid of this thing, as it's low-key scaring the heck out of me, and it's causing me not to like going into my kitchen or living room at night time. Back in October of 2004, I lost a cousin that I was close to due to an accidental overdose. His brother Mick and I are even closer because we are close to the same age, and we pretty much were raised in the same house as brother and sister as well. One day in February of 2005, Mick called me and he sounded very upset about a phone call that he had received. So I told him to come to my house so that I could figure out what he was talking about. When he got out of his car, he was as white as a sheet and shaking. This is what he told me when he was finally able to calm down. He said that he was driving when his phone rang. It was one of his parents calling from their house. Since he was driving, he let the call go to voicemail and pulled over to call them back, not bothering to listen to the voicemail. He said that his dad answered the phone, and both his parents denied even calling him in the first place, even though Mick's caller ID clearly indicated that someone else in the house had called him when the voicemail was recorded. After hanging up with his parents, Mick decided to see what the voicemail had to say. After he listened to it, that's when he called me in a panic. He refused to tell me anything about the voicemail. Instead, he just queued it up and shoved the phone up to my ear so that I could hear it for myself. And I will never forget that voicemail. I felt the color drain from my face, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I distinctly heard my cousin, who had been dead for nearly 4 months at this point, say, "It's me, I'm here, and I need your help." My cousin also had a very unusual cadence and sound to his speech. It was unmistakably him leaving a voicemail from his parents' home phone number where he accidentally overdosed and lost his life. But he seemed scared or worried or something. Unfortunately, 11 years later, there was a house fire that destroyed everything in the house, including that voicemail that we had pulled off of Mick's phone and saved on a computer. But that voicemail, it changed my life drastically, and my cousin and I dove into researching the paranormal ever since then. I really wish that I still had that voicemail recording too. And while that's not proof positive for a lot of other people, and I know that there are skeptics who aren't going to believe my experience, I wanted to share why I became an investigator in the first place. And also I'm wondering if any of you guys are into the paranormal, and why did you guys get into it? I would love to hear about your experiences as well, if you'd be willing to share. The last time that I had sleep paralysis, it was very, for a lack of a better term, demonic. I felt and saw the presence of 3 entities, one on top of me, one in the corner, and one trying to unlock my bedroom door. I never sleep with my door unlocked. My sister, the previous day, also had the same occurrence, and I will never forget that my mum said that week she had heard stuff in the room. This time it was the last night, and significantly less demonic. I opened my eyes and could feel the sleep paralysis starting to take over me, and I violently started to try and shake my leg and snap out of it. I could feel someone in the room, though, shaking my bed violently, trying to harass me. Mind you, ever since I had my first sleep paralysis, If I'm alone, I sleep with my LED lights on dim and never lay on my back because I feel vulnerable and prone to sleep paralysis if I do. My first time doing that was very traumatizing, let me tell you. Now, back to what I was seeing. I was on my back and could only look straight up and see what was in my vision range. I sleep by a window and I could see a ridiculous amount of flies around the curtains hung at my window. The only time that you can see that amount of flies is if something is dead or rotten. I was really confused. I was violently trying to wake my body up. I could really only mutter a prayer to save myself from things getting potentially worse. I then felt a pressure on my chest like the last time I had it. Only this time I couldn't see a demon until towards the end when I saw an entity slowly trying to creep on top of me wearing a white sweater and floral pants. The nightmare was over soon enough for me to wake up completely confused and startled. But the weirdest thing was that those flies, they were real. They were all over the curtain and it absolutely freaked me out. I instantly ran out of the room and went to get some spray for all of them. But can anyone explain this? It was so weird. Praying seems to be my only way out. I would generally consider myself a skeptic. I don't really believe in this kind of stuff, usually, but I've been having some strange experiences. I don't really have anyone else to turn to, so I hope that this place might get me some answers, or at the very least, rule out some options. So, it started back a few months ago. My house is small and only has 3 tiny bedrooms. The majority of the time I've lived here, there are 5 people here. I shared a room with my sister up until October of 2023, when my brother moved out and she took his old room. A while after that is when I started to notice odd things. At first, it was generally just paranoia, I guess. In my room, and only in my room for at least an hour before I go to sleep, I would get really paranoid. It could be a feeling of being watched or sort of being hyper-aware of noises, but I would just be really anxious. Then things picked up a bit. I started to feel something hovering over my ear, never seeing anything but feeling it deeply. That sort of tickle when somebody whispers to you. Like that, but just hovering over my ear. This only ever happened to my right ear as well, which was strange. It just so happens that when I lay on my left side, I face a mirror as it's my closest door. Apparently, that's bad luck, I hear, but anyway, it goes on from here because one night as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a man clearly whisper, "Stay awake," in my right ear, which scared the heck out of me for obvious reasons. And I felt that same hovering sort of watched feeling as well. Lately too, I've noticed things moving across my vision. Shadows in the corner of my eyes and little white blurs across my vision. This really only ever happens in my bedroom and not much else. I've also noticed something worse when I sleep as well. You see, I often sleep with my hand under my pillow, and sometimes my hand peeks out from under the pillow, and that is when it happens. Something is, well, grabbing my hand. It always starts at my index finger and pulls slightly on it as if trying to be discreet. Then it works its way to my pinky. Then it goes back to the index finger, only this time it makes sort of small circular motions with it while pressing it on my pillow lightly. It does this with each one until it reaches my pinky. Then after that, it always shakes my headboard. I've also noticed that my mattress shakes slightly while I sleep, which is definitely not normal. And as far as I can recall, this is all the detail that I have as of now. I'm really worried that I have a ghost of some kind in my house, and I'm also worried because, well, mental illness runs in my family and my grandpa had schizophrenia. So here I am asking you, Do I have a ghost, or should I be evaluated instead? And if I do have a ghost, well, what can I do about it? I'll try to answer as many responses as possible, so feel free to ask or clarify anything in the comments below. I'll try to answer as many responses as possible, so feel free to ask any clarification or comments or whatever below. So I grew up on a farm in Max Creek, Missouri, literally in the middle of nowhere. My mum and my dad, they always told me about this old farm called the Arnholtz Farm, and that it was supposedly haunted. My mum used to be friends with a lady who lived there in high school, and when visiting once, saw a man standing at the top of the stairs, so they called the police. They come to find out later that it was the man who apparently ended himself there in the house. A bit of backstory before I begin as well. One man, he shot himself in the house, and another hung himself in the barn, and it had a really nice family cemetery just down the hill. That's just how it was back in the days. Cemeteries were often on private land. My dad told me his younger brother David had taken a date for a drive and saw what looked like candlelight in the windows. There had not been anyone living on the farm for years at this point. So one day, I decided to go and check it out for myself. My grandfather owned the land after all, so it wasn't like I was going to get into trouble or anything. This was also in late August. So there was a good walk up a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, maybe about 30 minutes. I got to the middle gate and I climbed over, and this is where things started to get interesting. You see, as soon as I got over the fence, I felt like something was watching me. I shrugged it off and started down the small path, which was just big enough for a pickup to drive down. As I started to walk, I noticed something was walking in the woods on my right, keeping stride with me step for step. I figured maybe a deer or wild turkeys. So I kept going down the road, but the steps kept the same pace as me and were literally parallel to me in the woods. I started to get creeped out, so I did a bit of a test to see what would happen. I would change the pace of my walk from fast to slow, and whatever it was doing the same. So to really test it, I just took off at a dead sprint, and so did it. And then I stopped, and it did too. I challenged whatever it was to stop messing around and to come out and face me, but nothing. By this time, I had gotten to the clearing where the house was along with the barn. The path had a sort of mid-turn to the right in a clearing with the house on the right and the barn to the left. Once I made it to the clearing, whatever was following me didn't follow me out of the woods. The house was really starting to fall apart as well. Whoever lived there had a thing for roosters because there were paper clippings all over a wall. I couldn't go upstairs because the floors were sagging. I went and checked out the barn at one point. The rope that the man had used, it was still there, and you could see that it was frayed from where they had cut him down. I went just down the hill to the left of the barn and paid my respects to the family buried in the small cemetery plot. I spent maybe 2 hours just checking the place out. It was starting to get late, so I figured that I had better get heading home anyway. And just as soon as I got around the bend into the woods, whatever was in there, it started up with walking stride for stride with me again, but on the opposite side of the trail. This went all the way to the gate. It literally followed me right up to the gate. I climbed over the gate, and as I was walking away, I heard it walk up to the gate and stop. I turned around, and there was nothing. I was only 4 or 5 steps away, so I should have been able to see something, but there was nothing there. I ended up nervously saying, "Have a good day" to whatever it was, and in the end I just left. I never did go back to that place, but I guess now I sort of would like to just see it again. So, my mum and I were visiting my family and staying in a cabin at my uncle's ranch. There's a main house, a bunch of animal pens or fields, a dog kennel, and then there's the guest cabin across the lot from the main house. There are other homes nearby, so it wasn't super remote or anything, but we were surrounded by forest, mountains, and obviously some fields. So, middle of the night, my mum and I are sleeping and we both wake up because there's suddenly a really strong, weird smell permeating the cabin. We commented that it must be a skunk, but also, both of our dogs sat up and got restless. They didn't bark or make any noise. I was having trouble getting back to sleep with the smell, and getting the dogs to lay down again was difficult as well. So I just went outside to have a cigarette in the end. It was pretty much pitch black at this point, but I could see my immediate area from a dim porch light. I was leaning against my car and I started to hear someone walking across the gravel. From the sound, I presume that the footsteps originated from the forest area behind the barn, then walked through the gravel parking area and turned toward the cabin. I thought that it was weird that whoever it was seemed to have passed by the kennel, and the dogs weren't making any noise. None of the animals were, in fact. But I figured that it had to have been my uncle or one of my cousins out doing something. I was curious what they were doing out so late at night. I was tracking where the footsteps were from the sound as they were getting closer, and just waiting for someone to walk near enough that I would see who they were. I almost called out too, but in the end I decided to wait. Eventually, though, I saw what appeared to be someone wearing a hairy brown coat walking toward the field next to me. Now this is where it gets weird. You see, it was getting closer and about to walk by me, parallel by about maybe 6 to 10 feet. It was close enough that I realized that what I thought was a person in a hairy brown coat was actually the bottom half of a large creature on 2 legs. The bottom half, 2 legs and hindquarters, was about the size of an average adult and also appeared brown. The top half that I could only make out in the silhouette appeared black. Honestly, I couldn't tell how tall it was in the dark, but it just walked by and then into the field that was next to the cabin. Also, the gate wasn't open. I checked the next morning, so it would have had to have stepped over it to get into the field. I kind of registered what I saw, thought that I should probably be freaking out, but in the end I just sort of went back inside and I went back to bed. I did a little walk through the property the next day, to make sure all the animals were there and unharmed. And in the end, I only told my mum about the experience. We ended up coming back the next month, and she told my aunt and uncle about it then. I fully expected them to make fun of me for talking about Bigfoot, but my aunt, she just asked for some clarification and said that her sister had told them about seeing something similar, which honestly only made things 10 times freakier. This happened around 2021, and sometimes I still find it hard to grasp. For context, I now live in a different place and along with most of my relatives, so I feel safer saying this here, I guess. The reason I'm sharing this is for people to learn and possibly caution themselves from my experience. Now, I'd say the place that I lived in was just pretty old. It wasn't densely populated, nor empty either. It had wooded areas around it that you could cycle to the mall through, school as well, and other normal places, but you'd have to take a car to go to places like the hospital. I was basically in my last year of high school at this point, and being an only child and a girl on top of that made my parents overprotective, and I was naturally more cautious than the rest of my friend group. I didn't really mind being that way though, because I always thought that was the better option anyway. So teenagers from school would have these sort of outdoor get-togethers in the woods a few kilometers away from my school. It was just common for people to lounge out and about, chilling till like 3 in the morning or whatever. And including me, it was a group of 4. They decided since it was our last year that we should probably drink together in the woods. Obviously, looking back, that was a really stupid idea. It wasn't unsafe, I guess, and it wasn't deep in the woods either, but still. There's a pretty clear trail though, and a small sort of openish area where people would get their dogs and whatnot. We planned to do it on a Thursday because my parents would be out and the rest would convince theirs that we were having a sleepover. Now, we bought the alcohol and some other stuff just to chill out. There were no others that day because it was a weekday and quite chilly as well. It was pretty lively. You could see houses from the distance and people would be driving around and all, so naturally we felt pretty safe. We walked on the trail for about a minute when, for whatever reason, I just felt really uneasy. I felt like we were being watched or something like that, and looked over to one of my friends. She looked a little bit distressed too, but I guess we just sort of shrugged it off in the end. We walked a few more minutes and we found our spot. We started drinking and basically spent like an hour and a half of gossiping and having those sort of deep talks while you get drunk. I didn't drink too much and neither did my other friend. We were just a little bit tipsy. Now, we forgot about the brief weird feeling that we had felt while walking until we heard something from thick in the trees in front of us. Even though we were loud, we all heard it too. It was this sort of weird sort of snickering or giggling. I got up from this tree log that I was sitting on and just dragged my friends back a little bit. We had a fire going and 2 torches, but still couldn't really see into that area. It wasn't that close to us. I think about maybe 4 doors away if you place them horizontally. So the fact that we heard that laugh was just sort of insane to me. I pointed the flashlight into the area and nobody came out. I sat back down and when I turned the flashlight off, there was a silhouette coming out. I switched on the flash to blind that person while my other friends did the same. We started yelling and getting ready to run when I saw what I can only describe as the most horrifying thing that I have ever seen. It was this man who we'd never seen before. He had this sort of plaster-like smile and his hair was covered in dirt. He was completely pale and his eyes were almost like he wasn't looking at us but just in our sort of general direction. It's difficult to explain just how creepy this was, but it was textbook creepy. We all ran for it. My very drunk friends even managed to snap out of it. We got to my house eventually. I lived the closest to the place and said that we would call the cops. We absolutely terrified our parents as well, but yeah, we called the cops and in the end they found nothing. Word eventually got out and people pretty much stayed away from the paths at night time, and a couple of the guys in our school managed to get their dads and all with guns to find the guy, but nothing ever really came of it. Anyway, fast forward to maybe about a month later, but we didn't talk about it much and we never did anything like that again either. I got a pocket knife and some pepper spray to keep on me at that point as well. I went home after school and I was exhausted this day, so I decided to take a nap in the end. My dad was at work and my mum was visiting her sister. But I suddenly woke up to this weird sound. We had a 1-story and the walls were not too thick, so you could hear things all the time. Even still though, I had a bad feeling, so I locked all the doors and even the windows out of habit. Still, fearing for the worst, I also locked my room door and kind of looked out my window. There was nothing at this point. I grabbed a bat and my phone, heading out of my room. I looked at all the doors and everything was locked. But there was this weird, shuffling outside of my house, and I looked through the windows of my living room, and I kid you not, it was the same dude from the woods. He was just outside, walking in this erratic, eerie way, which honestly just sent me into a complete spiral. He somehow saw me and started saying hi there very loudly. I called the police, and after that I told him to get lost. After he started saying my name and all my friends' names as well. The police, they eventually got here and they actually got him this time. They questioned him and he had no history of mental illness or anything. He had no clinical disorder, and after enough questioning, he finally confessed to liking young women. He is apparently in jail now for other related reasons, but he'll probably get out in a couple of years, and to be honest, I'm kind of worried about that. Especially because he was guilty of attempted sexual assault and harassment. And the worst part is, that's all I know about.